Good morning, everyone. Can I welcome everyone to the Police and Crime Committee meeting? This morning, we'll be holding a discussion on neighbourhood policing and the experiences of young people. Please could I ask that you make sure your electronic devices are switched to silent to avoid any interruptions. And could I now ask our clerk, Lauren Harvey, if any apologies have been received?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from the Deputy Chairman, Assemblymember Hall, for whom Assemblymember Prince is attending as a substitute.
Thank you very much. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? No. Right, thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meetings held on the 2nd and 16th of July 2025 to be signed by me as correct records? Can we note the completed, ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings of the committee and the additional correspondence received? Can we note the recent actions taken by me as chair of the committee under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members to agree the following: that the committee's letter to the Metropolitan Police Service Commissioner on the Territorial Support Group and the additional correspondence sent to the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime on the Territorial Support Group. Before we begin our main item of business, I want to take this opportunity to say that the Police and Crime Committee has launched a survey to hear from organisations that work closely with young people and that engage with the Met. The survey is available on the London Assembly website and across all social media channels. Please do visit the survey and share with your colleagues. I'd like to now welcome our first panel of guests. Ashley Fontaine, who is the Young People's Programme Manager for Neighbourhood Watch Network. Welcome. Omar Alain Lola, who is the Communications and Police Engagement Manager for Hope in Haringey. Welcome. And Jessica West, who will be here very shortly, who is the Principal of Ark Walworth Academy. I'll start with the questions to you both. And this first section is about how safe do young Londoners feel? So in your experience, how safe do young people feel in their communities in London? Ashley, would you like to start?
Thank you. So from my experience, so my work is very varied in the sense that I do actually work across England and Wales, but I've done a lot of work this year in London. And from the conversations that I've had with multiple young people, their perception of safety is very varied. And I think it mainly comes down especially to how some of our young women, girls feel versus our young boys and young men as well. And I think that is a lot to do with a lot of kind of, discussions and kind of instances that have happened around violence against women and girls. So for me, when I've been talking to, a lot of the girls, a lot of young women, their fears are very much heightened. Their feelings around safety are a lot more insecure and unstable. And I think what's really been interesting as well is that the young boys that I've spoken to and worked with, so I work with 16 to 24-year-olds, they're very much aware of how the young women and girls are feeling. So when I've had discussions with them about safety, one of the key things that they always bring up is violence against women and girls. So it's very interesting to see how they're very aware and they're wanting to be involved in that conversation. And I think another thing as well, of course, adding on layers around in kind of minoritized experiences, and thinking about as well when it comes to a lot of discussions around young black boys and men and how they feel around safety is always something that comes up particularly as well. So there's a lot for me to explore around that, but those are kind of my general perceptions of what I've gathered over the last year.
Thank you. Ashley, before we go on, it might be a me thing, but could you just pull your mic a little bit closer to you, please? We do seem to be cursed in this committee with dodgy mics.
All right.
So hopefully that'll be okay. Thank you. Omar.
Good morning, thank you. Hopefully this microphone isn't cursed and it's working perfectly well. I'd just like to echo Ashley's point, really. My work in Haringey is hyperlocal, and so what we are looking at and seeing and hearing are the voices of young people who are expressing concerns around more overt and traditional forms of violence, i.e. Gang recruitment, personal thefts in terms of whether that is mobile phones or electronic devices, e-scooters, or what we also see online, so in terms of online grooming. And collectively, the answer would be no to answer that. They don't feel very safe. And that's not for a lack of want or trying. And so as we work with schools, we see that there is a concerted effort by educational partners to help young people feel safe. And young people are really applying themselves to those initiatives. And so I'm more than happy to share what we're going to discuss today.
Great, and I'm sure that we'll have the opportunity to look at some of those initiatives. Welcome, Jessica. No, absolutely no worries. Could you, I can see your microphone's quite a distance away. Would you mind pulling it a little bit closer to you? Thank you.
That sounds okay?
Thank you, great. And if you're able to, so the first question is, in your experience, how safe do young people feel in their communities?
So I'm here in kind of two capacities, three if you count my kind of personal experience. So I run a secondary school in Southwark, just next to Burgess Park, which those people who are interested in crime will know a lot about. But I also represent the 22 Southwark secondary head teachers, including specialist provision and also our pupil referral unit. On this particular aspect of things, and I chair the Safer Task Force for Southwark, which is the DFE initiative to reduce serious youth violence. So my experience is quite wide-ranging, and I've been a school leader in Lambeth and Southwark, which is one BCU now, for about 15 years. And I think that the changes that have been implemented over the last year and a half have been the single most undermining thing that has happened for the trust and experience of young people in the police services. It is my understanding that the dissolution of Safer Schools officers, has been taken on the basis, that the decision was taken on the basis that schools are generally quite a safe place. I think that schools have worked extremely hard, and that's definitely in collaboration with community partners, third sector organisations, social care, healthcare professionals over time. And I will say that in the last 2 years, my experience of schools officers, schools sergeants and schools inspectors has been better than it has been in the whole last 15 years. But the decisions that have been made and the mechanisms of those decisions being made, for me, undermine three of the 4 points that are on your talking list today.
Jessica, we are actually going to be talking about the Safer Schools officers issue later on. But could you maybe respond to the answer more generically in terms of safety and your experience of the young people that you deal with?
I think in terms of feeling safe, we have to be really clear that the police have a role in that. Children have a right to two things, to be safe and to feel safe. And both of those things don't necessarily come in tandem. Adult professionals from a range of different organisations need to do work to both ensure that children are safeguarded, in fact, but also to make sure that they feel safe in their environment. It was very, very important to trust and confidence to have a named officer who would be in schools as a point of contact, familiar face, familiar uniform. We do not have that now. We were not consulted about it. It's also important, I think, to know that we have less capacity, both in the force to receive officers into school for young people to build that trust, to build that sense of safety and support, and also because schools officers and cadets officers were DBS'd, and we don't have schools officers anymore. So only cadets officers hold a DBS, which means they're the only officers who can be in school unaccompanied. So we also don't have capacity to have officers in school and double staff it, which means that there's a problem on both sides. Young people don't see police officers in a trusted environment don't feel like that interaction is regular. It's also not specialist trained now, and the new roles aren't filled. So young people's sense of community safety is significantly compromised. Young people's sense of being able to approach uniformed people in their community, whether those are PCSOs or Met officers, is compromised because they haven't built that trust over time. And I think that their sense of safety is pretty shaken by that. I think their actual safety continues to be a big issue. In the last 7 days, within 10-minute walk of my school, there's been a triple stabbing involving 3 17-year-olds and a life-changing injury of a 14-year-old. Those are both within 10 minutes walk of my school gates. I don't have any information about those yet. And we went back to school for children today.
Okay, thank you very much, and also thank you. I know what it's like in schools on the first day of term, so thank you again for being able to be here today.
That's my tardy arrival. I'm sorry about that.
The next question for all of you is: do you think that more neighbourhood police officers will help young Londoners feel safer in their communities? And what's the reason for your answer? So, Omar, if we could start with you, please.
Yeah, that's a great question. To echo points made earlier, there's definitely a difference between feeling safe and being safe. And the presence of police officers in schools, around schools in our local neighbourhoods, is something young people would and have vouched for, especially when asked directly, is this something that they would like? The answer is almost always yes. Where contributions are to that feeling of safety come in is from the community, from households. And what you often see is that there is a disconnect between what young people want to feel safe and what their parents and perhaps elder carers may think makes them feel safe. And so there is a need for a communication with the wider community, that if you were to put more officers in and around schools, that parents and carers are made aware and are on board with that decision. Because, yes, young people would see an officer. It's a response to what they want and need and request. And perhaps there's not going to be that support when they relay that information back home. And so wider conversations are then perhaps engaged with those young people as to what an officer's presence may mean for them. And so it's a conversation that would need to have some nuance and some continued involvement from all stakeholders to make sure that any feelings of being safe, any feelings of safety are guaranteed and encouraged and furthered. And I'd like to, leave it at that for now.
Thank you. Jessica?
I fully echo that. I find this quite a difficult structure, because I think that the questions as they're organised are around sort of the impact of removal of safer schools officers, young people's trust, a child first strategy, and all of those things are so intertwined that actually the bigger changes speak to all of them. So kind of trying to stay in that specific remit, there wasn't a consultation done with stakeholders around disbanding the schools officers' teams. If there was, I guarantee you that what Omar's saying about what young people say about police officers, it consistently surprises people, because people like me sit in front of you and say, well, young people don't trust the police. That is true, and they do have really difficult interactions with police officers regularly. But at the same time, they have understood that the primary purpose of policing is to keep them safe, and they consistently ask for better presence, consistently, and that is quite surprising to adults, I think, and certainly family members will say that too. But the perspective of young people is they do want to be able to feel safe, and they do believe that there is a way forward for officers to be able to provide that support. They then are quite surprised when the interaction doesn't go particularly well. And I do think that it is really important to keep emphasising that all of the agencies have volunteered many, many times and will continue to do so. I've many times said, please come to my school, have the building to do your training. We will give you young people to do it. Ask them what they want. I think, I would advocate there needs to be, in the absence of this space, there needs to be a charter, a Met charter for young people, like a children's charter that would help children to understand what is the expectation for that interaction, that unplanned interaction with an officer. You'll be asked how you want to be addressed. You will be given the officer's name. They're going to tell you what's going to happen before it happens. This is how you might complain about it if you didn't enjoy it. Those sorts of things would be really helpful to that unplanned interaction that happens between young people and adults, because the opportunity for planned interaction has been significantly reduced by the decisions. And that's the sort of thing that helps children to feel safe. But I think Omar's absolutely right. Young people want to be policed in their communities. We police by consent in this country. They are consenting. They want it. They would find that reassuring. It's about how that interaction works and the lack of visibility, I think.
Thank you. Ashley?
Yeah, I very much agree with what both of you have said. I think consistently, time after time, when I speak with the young people that I've worked with, particularly this year in London, they all say that they want to have more of a visibility of police officers in their area. And especially recently, when I kind of did a survey around some of our young people in London, a lot of the things that they were saying in terms of how they would like more engagement with police officers is talking about how that interaction does pan out. So a lot around, being a bit more approachable. That word was consistently used quite a bit. And also just being a bit more talking on a level, realising that, although there is potentially a bit of understanding around power imbalance, but also being able to understand that you can still speak to a human being as a human being. And that's a lot of the feedback that I get from our young people across the board in London, no matter what borough I speak to. And I think one of the biggest things as well around neighbourhood policing that does come up for us a lot in the work that I've been doing this year is around thinking about how you can actually, similar to what you were saying, actually around co-producing something. So I do a lot of work with young people with co-production, and one of the things that I do is how can we create an initiative together that would help you feel safer in your community. And I think we do have some involvement with kind of different localised policing teams, but I think that needs to happen on a wider level of getting young people involved in, policies that will help them to feel safer, even just general kind of initiatives that go out, campaigns that go out that will help them to understand how they can feel safer and work with their neighbourhood policing teams. So, yeah, that's a lot of what I'm seeing.
Okay, I'll come to you in a second, Jessica. So the final thank you, Ashley. The final question from me is, how much trust and confidence do young people in London have in their local policing teams, and what can be done to increase young people's trust in the police? I know you've actually answered this as well, so please, just in the interest of time, because we've got a lot to go through, if you've already answered a question, please do move on. But Jessica, you're first.
Thank you. I completely agree with Ashley, and I would say that it's more than just co-production with young people. It's about stakeholders. I think at the moment we're not observing our duty under the 2023 statute safeguarding young people in terms of our collective duty. Our interagency cooperation is not good enough, and that includes between the police and young people. So when you say how much confidence and trust do they have in their neighbourhood policing team, they don't know their neighbourhood policing team. How would they? They haven't met them. They don't know them. And those officers have not had any compulsory training on working with young people. They're not experienced at that. There are 4 new training modules that are being rolled out, but they are only compulsory for designated ward officers with children and youth specialism. And they're online training modules. I've seen the content. It's not bad. But it's not compulsory for any other SNT officer. So you may not have children of your own, you may not have met young people, you may not have interacted with them, and you may not know any kind of de-escalation techniques explicitly, but you're a safer neighbourhoods person. You've never met these young people at school or in any other setting, because that's not part of the remit, and you're expected to be able to manage this interaction that's probably unplanned, with both of you not really knowing what's going to happen, and that's supposed to build trust and confidence. That's a problem. So I think there are some mechanisms that are out there, but those 4 training modules are only mandated for DWO CYPs. They are not mandated for anyone else in SNT. And now that we've removed the single point of contact, we really need to do that. PCSOs have access to the same amount of training, but it's not mandated for them either. And PCSOs are the people who've been put into communities, school communities, very specifically on duty time, so transitions to and from school. And we have to remember that our neighbourhoods team are very important to young people, but Londoners are 2.5 times more likely to choose a school that's not their local school, which means that children aren't always in their own neighbourhoods. They're moving. And transport hubs are really difficult for young people. We know that. School, like duty bits, the to and from, often the feedback that we get is it's that transition that's really difficult. You know, I'm looking across for some nods. That's really difficult, but that's not your neighbourhood's team, and you can't know them. It's often the one that's nearest, but there's no interaction with the school now, and those people are de-skilled. So mandated training and something around relationships building is really necessary. And I think that kind of stakeholder bit is really important underneath that kind of 2023 piece of legislation around working together to safeguard children, because we haven't had enough contact about how this works.
Okay, just for completeness and fairness, we have as a committee been told by the Met that the Child First strategy is being rolled out and training on that will be given to every front-facing officer. So I'm just putting that in there in terms of training when you're saying that not everybody will be given training. So this is what we've been told as a committee.
I think they're up next after me. You know,
if we can move. So, Ashley.
Yeah, I think very much to echo in terms of levels of trust, confidence in policing from young people, it's not there. I agree, it's not there. Especially when I speak to particular groups that I guess in many ways are a bit more at a disadvantage, they're a bit more at threat because of intersectionality. I know particularly as well, young black women that I speak to, there's a lot of distrust. And it's really hard. It's heartbreaking to hear. It's hard to come at as well with all the time a solution, because you know we are doing our best as a charity, but it doesn't mean we have the answers on our own. And I think it's important, especially having these conversations and listening to both of you and learning from you is exactly what we need to do is coming together. And I think in general, kind of a lot of the lack of trust and confidence does come down to what we've been talking about the police interactions and how that pans out, and just how young people feel about how police are kind of, engaging with them from a school perspective, but outside of school as well, just within their communities on a day-to-day basis. So I think there's a lot that is still can be done to really improve and boost that trust and confidence, and hopefully something comes out of that today.
Thank you. Omar.
Yeah, I think to echo and also pivot a little bit, because it might explain why I'm here. So Hope in Haringey are a social broker as well as a charity. Our work with the police speaks to this question directly. Young people don't feel safe, but there is a way forward as to how young people feel safe, and that is to destigmatize, is to demystify, and that is to directly engage with police officers. So what we do is we bring young people and police officers into neutral spaces, and what happens there is almost always a mutual learning and understanding. Why is that important? Because, well, in a few weeks' time, we're going to see a number of young people dressed up as police officers for Halloween. What does that mean? It means that in every household, from a young age, there is a want and an understanding that the police are good people, that there is a want and legitimized career aspiration to be a police officer, and there is a understanding that they have a role in the community, and that there's always going to be a role for young people in that future structure. Now, once you kind of grow up, you perhaps might have a different understanding and interpretation of the police, and that's usually through negative interactions, ones in which you may experience personally, or perhaps through experiences of your peers, or what you may see on social media. And so when you look at the data, very few young people ever interact with the police, but almost all have an opinion, whether that's good or bad. And so what we do is encourage young people to speak for themselves about their fears, about their hindrances, their perhaps even wants to go into policing, whether that is through public service courses or in a classroom and they're just considering what their next GCSE option might be. And I bring that all up to say is that police officers also have a similar hesitancy with young people. Not all Met officers are from London. They are perhaps from the home counties, and they have a very different understanding and experience of and with young people. And that's important because when we bring police officers and young people together, they're often at two different sides of a room, or even of the segregated part of the playground that we've organised this event for. And it's only through direct discussion that you see young people and police officers get closer, that they speak, that they understand what it's like to be a young person in Haringey, a police officer who's working in Haringey, and see each other beyond the shiesty, behind a hoodie, behind a uniform. And that's really important because we, and I've brought this today, we survey every young person in our sessions. And quite often what you see at the beginning of the session is a very low confidence score. This one here is about average. It's about 5 or a 6 out of 10. And why is that important? It's because it means that they come into a session wanting to have a level of confidence in the police that takes them forward, that gives them a degree of goodwill, that they're willing to hear a police officer out as to what they're doing in their local area. Why have they taken this career path to be a specialist officer, or to not be a specialist officer if they are a newly recruited cadet? And what we see at the end of the interaction, after half an hour or 2 hours, however long the young people have questions for these police officers, is an increase in their confidence score. And so here, this one's gone quite well. It started off as a 6 as to do they agree that the police can be relied upon to be there when needed. And at the end of the session, they scored an 8 out of 10. Now, what does that mean? It means that young people are keen to learn and hear directly from police, and that is directly, as you see here, increasing their confidence in the police and what they do. And so a lot of young people, when they come into our sessions, are expressing the thoughts that we've shared at the beginning of this meeting, that is, they don't believe in police officers, they don't have a confidence in them, but they want to. And it's only through direct conversations with officers who are willing to be honest and direct and transparent about what questions young people have, about giving answers to perhaps unsatisfactory interactions with the police that they can then have a confidence in. And confidence is really important because when we started this session with me speaking about the experience of young people with direct forms of violence, whether that is their phone being stolen, and a young person may come into our session having had their phone stolen, and perhaps it's not been taken any further, but through a conversation with the police officer, they now understand that, hey, what the officers perhaps doing, what the team are doing behind the scenes is they might not be able to recover the phone directly, and it may seem as through their most recent liaison officer that there's no further action can be taken, but realistically they're using that instance as an investigation point within, an evidence point within the investigation to perhaps build a stronger case against the people who are stealing their phones. And in that very moment, a young person believes that the horrible thing they went through matters, and that they're a part of a system which is working for them and is in their best interests. And that alone helps young people demystify and see behind the curtain as to what police are doing to keep them feel safe, or to help them feel safe and to keep them safe. And that's really important in boosting confidence, because that begets further goodwill. And you can go from very hostile schools at the beginning of an academic year to ones which are immediately after that hour or 2 hour session saying, can you come back and speak to more of my peers? And that alone is an illuminating experience, because 2 days ago there was a session in Haringey about stop and search, about what is being done. And if you speak to a young person who's been to one of our sessions, they would be able to counteract those sorts of narratives by saying, look, we learned about stop and account. That alone has changed their perception, understanding and confidence in the police, and as to what an unplanned interaction is supposed to be, and what outcomes can be, and what it means in terms of just having a physical presence that matters to young people. And so there is a way forward into building that confidence, but it does involve having officers around for young people to speak to. Cutting engagements is not going to help young people feel safe, because it just leaves that void of where narratives can build, because there aren't people around to directly speak to the questions young people have. And that's really important as you go forward to make sure that those questions are answered.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Garbett.
Morning. Thank you for your contribution so far. I've got a few specific questions to follow up on just from some things that have been said, so I'm going to come to individuals, if that's all right. I've been reading Liberty's Policing the Playground report, the human rights organisation that recently released their report. And in that, they say that to build trust and confidence, police should prioritise procedural justice, fairness, openness and accountability. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that. As a way of building trust. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think openness, I think that word kind of springs out to me the most when you were speaking. And I think there does need to be, general levels of openness. But I think within that, it's kind of thinking about transparency as well. I think I'm just thinking about the work that I've been doing this year, and that is something that comes up a lot around us wanting to build spaces where young people feel like they can be brutally honest, and young people are brutally honest, which is the best thing about working with young people. They don't hold back, they don't sugarcoat. And I think that's been the best thing about understanding for them what that means in terms of their safety. So, for example, when I've worked with some of the young people in Newham, in terms of safety for them, some of the things that came out was really about wanting to be having more spaces to be open and honest and engaging with policing teams. And that's something that ideally is something that we would definitely want to support and set up. And I think in general as well, when it comes to the young people that I've spoken to in terms of openness and transparency, it's very similar to what you've been saying around that kind of bringing people together and just having conversations. And also from my perspective with the work that I do, it's building on initiatives that are already there or completely taking them apart, deconstructing them, and getting young people's voices in those spaces about how they can be kind of, reconstructed, redesigned, and making sure that it fits with what they need. Because I think a lot of the times young people's voices they're heard, but they're not listened to. So they're not actually given the space to have a say on what goes on in their communities around safety, around crime prevention. And that's exactly the work that I do and I'm very, very proud of being able to do and support. So I think openness, transparency, those keywords really jump out to me just because of the work that I've been doing. I think they have a massive role to play going forward. It also just depends to extent how honest people are willing to be, I suppose, especially not just young people, but also policing teams, stakeholders around, how honest are they willing to be in terms of thinking about the systems, are they currently working, being really brutally honest, and thinking about as well, how can we make sure young voices are embedded in that? Because for me, co-production is very much super important when it comes to young people's work.
Yeah, thank you. That was really well articulated. The bit that I find interesting in that as well is the procedural justice and the fairness elements. So I guess, is there a perception that you've come across around, from young people with engagement, around that kind of disproportionality or unfairness in policing? Is that ever a theme that comes out of the interactions?
Yeah, it does a little bit actually. So from kind of the survey that I did recently in terms of kind of how young people feel around policing particularly, a lot of the things that did come up was about feeling like the kind of things that happen after an incident. It's kind of similar to what you were saying actually, Omar, in terms of when an incident happens and a kind of solution is, made. A lot of the young people feel that the solution that's made is unfair. Like it doesn't really reflect what should be really happening in terms of keeping them safe. So that's something that has come up a little bit, not so much particularly within my work, but it has come up a little bit from the survey that I did. I'm really keen to explore a little bit more around that unfairness and why young people that I've particularly worked with feel like when an incident happens and something comes out of that as a solution, why they do think it's unfair. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts around that. But yeah, that's just probably tip of the iceberg, I think.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And yeah, I was going to follow up, and it picks up on something that you were saying, Ashley. So Amar, in your work, and when you were just describing the work that you do, you mentioned that young people learn about the police and the police learn about young people. So I wonder if you could speak to anything that you've seen change in the police from the workshops, because you described a lot about the young people's perception of the police, but I just wondered if you ever do an assessment of the police's perceptions of young people and if they actually change anything about what they do.
That's a great question. As our work is hyperlocal and the officers that we interact with and engage with in schools is usually more than once, the feedback that we see is direct with that officer. Now, what I will say is that engagement officers are often the best the Met can put forward to speak to a young person. They are somebody who is aware of cultural issues. They're aware of ways to speak with young people. They're aware of what young people are about to say, sometimes often before they say it, and that's because they continuously engage with young people on a day-to-day basis. And so how young people respond and feel to a lot about what the Met is structurally is often a very small snippet as to what they think the wider Met might be. And why that's important is because young people may approach and come into a session believing the Met is racist, and perhaps by engaging with a BME officer that they can speak to their own personal experiences within the Met. And so to then answer your question about how do we see feedback in the police in terms of how they respond, what they change, what we primarily see is officers who become a little bit more aware of what a young person might be about to go through. And that's been perhaps the biggest thing that we see. And the reason why that's important is because our officers are in the local area already. They are, like I said, already culturally aware of what is a very diverse area that is Haringey. And so I can't speak to the entirety of the Met, but we definitely see small requests like if you are going to stop somebody and you've got the big TSG van, perhaps don't have the lights on whilst doing a search. If it's not blocking the roadway and it's perfectly safe to turn the lights off, people feel respected in that they know that a very small number or percentage of stop and searches result in a arrest. And so if we're going under that understanding of goodwill between the community and policing, that policing by consent involves a level of encouraging goodwill. And so if it means speaking to people with respect, and we're seeing that change and feedback comes in from young people saying, I've been stopped by the police and it went much better than previously, we are seeing that. As to what degree that is institutional, we're not sure. But what we can say is that on an individual level, where we see police teams go back to their bases and they perhaps share feedback, we are seeing, short term at least for now, changes in their behaviour.
That was really interesting, and I think it echoes a lot of what we hear in the community generally about the individual versus the system and some of the stuff that you were speaking to, Jessica. So I'm just going to come to you, Jessica, for my little questions. And I think you really described that kind of. I really liked what you were saying about the interconnectedness of organisations around safeguarding duties. But I just wanted to ask you about where was I going to start? Because you talked a lot about people kind of knowing their rights, which I found really interesting. And I just wondered if you were aware of the Stop and Search Charter, which says that it engaged with like 80 young people. But I just wondered if that went any way to doing anything that you were describing around people knowing what to expect.
So I find this work quite difficult because I think that the things that Ashley and Omar are talking about are absolutely right, and I entirely recognise the absolute necessity for co-production, and also the fact that Omar's saying that the Met engagement officers are the best, right? They are. PC Kip, Schools Officer of the Year 2023, is the finest officer in my experience. The whole schools team were absolutely brilliant. But this engagement role does not now exist in Southwark. So we've lost that resource. And where the best resource is, we are talking about top-end service and really good frontline trust built between young people and officers. You can't take that away. People will come and ask for him. If he's coming past school and stops near the playground, we have got young people who will be like, PC Kip. I mean, and this is not necessarily what you would expect from these young people. But, taking a leaf out of Ashley's book about the joy of working with young people being that they are brutally honest, I kind of feel like that's our job in advocating for them. And you asked about whether it was fair, whether they feel like it's fair. They don't feel like it's fair because it's not fair. Young people of colour are stopped and searched at an alarming rate compared to white young people. Pupil premium children are cautioned at receive a caution +3 at 3 times the rate of non-pupil premium children. It's not fair. That's why they think it's not fair. And of course, in a school like mine, which is in the top 20 most deprived schools in the UK, you will find that all of those shared experiences are discussed without necessarily the opportunities for neutral space that Omar, etc., were talking about. So my concern is not actually about the front line. My experience of the front line was really great. I am deeply concerned about the sort of organisational change and value that is placed on co-construction, neutral spaces, the voice of young people, multi-agency working, in what that says about the values of the organisation and how we get that out. So I hear you, Child First strategy for the Met, lovely. Why have they got a strategy that isn't a strategy that links with social care, schools, healthcare professionals? Like, often they do something, so the Safer Schools officers are gone, designated ward officers with children and youth specialism are in. There wasn't a consultation for that involved stakeholders. There are lots of committees. I sit on them. Pan London, all the rest of it. That's not a consultation. They don't know about the DBS issue. When I raised it, people were like, what do you mean? I was like, well, that's, under the Safeguarding Vulnerable Groups Act, I can't leave you alone with my children if you don't have DBS. End of story. You might be a police officer, but unless you're actually arresting them and taking them away from me, which you require my consent to do, then you're not going to be doing that. So there isn't enough discussion of how this works. And what that means is that things like the Stop and Search Charter sit in a vacuum, and the Child First strategy, of course, they'll all get training, but I'm asking about who's got training, given there now isn't a single point of contact for young people in a trusted zone. Who's got training to talk to a young person, not know what the Child First strategy is or know what Stop and Search means? Who knows how to de-escalate a young person who's like, why are you talking to me? Because actually they are confused by that and they're nervous. The adultification units are really important. I have definitely been in circumstances where PCSOs and police officers who are non-child facing as their general role have said things like, no, he can go home on the bus on his own just after he's been mugged. He might be tall, but he's 13. So no, he can't. He'll have to come back to school and we'll ring his mum because he's 13 and he's a child. And that is really important. And of course, every single one of us can speak to brilliant work from individuals, also from school sergeants, also from school inspectors. But what is happening at leadership level is away from multi-agency stakeholders. And I'm telling you now, I can't get at it. And I'm pretty persistent. So I've had many conversations with previous MOPAC about this, and when I looked at my records, it started in 2020. It's 5 years since I've been talking about concern about abstraction, specific duties, resource for young people. I've spoken to the Children's Commissioner, I've spoken to my local MPs. I can't get past the borough commanders. I've tried several times, and I'm on every committee, but I haven't been consulted. And I've got strong feelings, you might be able to tell.
No, it's really, I think that's really powerful, and some of the themes that we've often brought up here around that kind of joint working, and something that I'm really passionate about the investment in youth services, the NHS, and joining those things up. One last thing I wanted to ask you was
Assembly Member Garbutt, I'm really sorry. We are now, I've never had to say this so early on, but we really do need to pick up the pace, and we're still on the first section.
Yeah. I thought it was down till, I thought you had a couple minutes. Yeah, okay.
So, and you have had 3 supplementaries.
Okay.
So if we could move on, and if I could, I mean, we've already got to the meaty bits, and, as a panel, you've been really clear about the issues, but can I ask members and panellists to just be succinct in your questions and answers, because we've got so many other answers that we want to hear. Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Happy to yield this question, Chair, in the interest of time.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Bailey, do you still want to ask your question?
I'm going to yield, Chair, and try and wind it into my problem.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. OK. Moving on to the second section, which is, forgive me, let me just get my papers back together again. It's because I was so busy listening to these brilliant answers. OK, engaging with young people. Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, panel. And thank you for your contribution so far. I think it's been a really brilliant discussion. Ashley, I think you reinforced that young people do want to engage with their neighbourhood officers, and I think that's been repeated as well by other panellists. But what do you think the main challenges are and barriers that prevent young people with actually doing that engagement? And what would your advice be for potentially overcoming that?
That's a really good question. I think from my experience, some of the barriers that have come to light are, one, particularly young people are a bit scared in many instances that I've that I've been exposed to, and what they're telling me. And I think they're scared to approach, especially people from minoritized backgrounds, because even just approaching a police officer, it's like there's so many questions that run through their mind in terms of, just by saying hello, like, am I putting myself in a position of vulnerability? Am I potentially putting myself in a position where something's going to happen that is out of my control? Or even down to, do I know my kind of own, my rights, and how that will impact that interaction? So being scared, feeling a bit intimidated is definitely something that comes up from the young people that I've spoken to. And that is definitely the biggest one that I've come across. I think in terms of overcoming that, I think I feel like I'm just repeating, but it really does span a lot to what we've been saying in terms of having those spaces to engage with policing teams. Like spaces like yours, if yours could be rolled out across London, I think that would be great, because I feel like there isn't, as far as my knowledge, there isn't something like that really is existing that can really help to bring that neutral ground, and also a lot of peer-to-peer learning. And I think that is the essence and crux of what just needs to happen, is peer-to-peer learning and actual action off the back of it. I mean, that's a lot of the work that I do, is actually bringing that action to life. I speak with young people, we have discussions about how they want to engage with their policing teams and their fears, but my kind of work really is getting them to feel empowered, to be able to take some action off the back of that. So whether that's them wanting to create a campaign, whether that's wanting them to actually create an event where they bring young people together with community leaders, but also people from policing teams. That is something as well that, different types of initiatives that do come up. So I think one thing that could overcome is definitely having spaces like yours across London. And I think also giving young people the chance to feel empowered, and giving young people the chance to understand as well, like what you've been saying as well, Omar, like how to actually think about when they're engaging with these police officers, how to actually, from their standpoint, what are their expectations, how to actually engage with them from their level. So I think that's probably the best response I can give to that.
I mean, in my experience, it's de-skilled adults that are working with young people who don't have high expectations of what they're about to bring. Where there are adults, such as engagement officers, who are in school, you'll find that every 50 minutes, we literally train people to greet young people with a bright face, even if you've just had a terrible lesson. Bright face is really important. There are officers in the Met that do not know that you need to greet people with a bright face. They just don't know that. And that's really important to children. Like, if you are stern, if you just happen to have a resting face that is particularly, sour, a resting stern face, let's call it that, then if I'm 12, I don't want to talk to you. Positive interaction, absolutely, therefore, the chance for it is gone. It's done. So, for me, the onus is on adults to be better at children. And a Child First strategy is really important. But the idea of the current line, policing for a policing purpose, seems to presuppose that children aren't vulnerable enough to be victims, because there isn't really a safe space for disclosure. And that's now been removed from schools. So upskilling adults to interact with children without an intermediary, if there isn't going to be a space such as Omar's in every borough, if there isn't always going to be an organisation like Ashley's working with young people to build that confidence in the absence of another adult, and if there isn't going to be a school interaction, that's really important.
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier to engagement is perhaps the Met itself. If you've ever worked in sales, you know that the first rule is approach the customer, and that's how you make a sale. And that is a challenge I think the Met has, similar to the stern faces, that young people would like to talk to the police officer about what is going on in their local area, but they don't feel like they can approach them. And if officers were perhaps encouraged or perhaps were made aware that people want to talk to them and perhaps that they have permission to talk to people on an informal level, that could definitely change a culture of approach between the community and the police. That would go a long way to just beginning that process of building bridges between the two. And I also say that because I've heard an anecdote before that the police are sometimes like sheepdogs, and it's a horrible analogy because the idea of a sheepdog is that if you are a sheep, the sheepdog is to look after you, but if you are a sheep, you see the sheepdog like a wolf, and that we don't want police officers to look like wolves to us. We want them to look like us. We want them to be part of our communities. And whilst there is, I understand and recognise that there is a need for that distinction, there perhaps needs to be a more friendly approach to how the two interact and less delineation between the two in a way that feels so formal and cold.
Thank you all very much. And Omar, you spoke earlier about the work that you've done with Hope and Haringey. What lessons do you think have been learned from that in terms of police engagement and young people's involvement with local neighbourhood policing teams, safer neighbourhood teams, and how do you think that could be, brought benefit around the rest of London?
Yeah, thank you. Speak with one another, come into a neutral space. People feel as if they're talking with the police or vice versa, police to young people is a no-go area. The truth is that community stakeholders like schools, like youth hubs, want to encourage interactions between young people and the police. If you've gone to a PRU, as Jessica said earlier, one of the biggest challenges is that they've already interacted with the police in a negative way. And so there is an opportunity to change and perhaps give an understanding as to what they went through and why it went the way it did. And perhaps, again, for a police officer to learn what made the interaction feel so sour in the mouth of a young person. And as such, we need to encourage and continue to encourage some more conversations which recognise police have something to learn from young people, and that young people want to learn from the police as to what goes on behind the scenes. There is a lot of myths around what young people do on a daily basis, and there are a lot of myths around what happens in a police station and on the streets. And for communities to feel like the police are doing something, they need to know what they're doing. And if you don't know what somebody's doing, you're going to feel like they're doing nothing. And so we need to continue to encourage insight as to what is happening behind the scenes and just encourage that conversation. It doesn't have to, I don't have to know all the secrets as to which officer's working on this and that, but just know that, look, when something happens, this is the chain, this is what an officer is expected to do, what we hope they do, this is what how you go to complain if you need to, and just make the whole process transparent, because once people know, they feel empowered to do something, and that's what officers continue to speak about from the community, and that they want the community to be involved in policing, to identify risk areas, persons of interest, and the community has been resistant because they don't feel as if that information is going to be done anything with, and so there needs to be that destigmatization as to what is happening when the two parties come together.
All starts with a conversation. Thank you very much, Omar. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I come to you, Assembly Member Garrett, for the next few question members, in the interest of time, I know it says all, targeted to all, but if we could literally target a panel member in terms of questions. Sorry, that sounds really awful, and it's not meant to be awful at all. But just in the interest of time, and I think my members all know what
Can I just say I'm going to get very, very anxious if I don't get to speak about schools officers. That's really worrying to me. Safer schools officers.
You will get a chance to talk about schools officers. I mean, literally, we have we have a section specifically for that. Okay, Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. I'm equally conscious of the time, as we're supposed to be starting panel 2 at 11 o'clock. So, quick question. Police cadets, do you think that they're a useful way for engaging young people in the work of the police?
Yes, we've seen following 2020 that officers that come from local neighbourhoods often have better interactions with local people when they are policing them. Mm-hmm. And so cadets, whether that is a teenage recruit who's about to apply to join the Met or one that has gone through that process, is one that we see has a stronger foundation to interact with the public. And so we encourage trainee cadets or recently graduated cadets to go into schools and have lunch with young people and to just see what's going on in the local area and what's interesting to them. We find that has been positive. And whilst it's too soon to see how those interactions are going to manifest when they are senior officers, should they pursue a career in policing that long, we're seeing so far in the last 5 years that it has had a positive impact as to how young people are seeing officers that they recognise and they've had that neutral space to interact with them first, and how also a police officer is informed as to how they interact with police, with young people in the community, as to who are genuine targets of interest or people of interest versus stereotyped or misinformed assumptions as to who a person of interest might be.
Thank you.
We actually give space that we would otherwise be able to let for profit to the cadets to run every Tuesday night on our site, because what that means is there will be uniformed officers coming in and out of the building in a shared space with no confrontation with young people, and we think that's really important. Also, the cadet group are the last DBS officers in the Met, so they can come in and out as they please, which is very helpful to us.
Thank you.
Do I have time?
Yes, very quickly.
Quickly. I just wanted to add to that and say, I've been part of Police Gets myself when I was a bit younger, and I had a really good experience. I think one of the things that I took away from it particularly was the fact that you get to see police officers as just, again, humane. You get to see them outside as well of a police setting. They become a bit more of a friendlier face, as we've been saying. And I think as well that really just helps to just break down any kind of negative barriers and experiences that people might have had, and just kind of slowly brings people together a lot more. So it definitely does have an impact.
Thank you. I'll yield to question 8, Chair. Chair.
My apologies. Thank you very much, Assembly. Sorry, you were so quick there, Assembly Member Roberts. Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
Well, some of us have got to be quick, haven't we, Chair? We've only got 4 minutes left for the next 6 questions. Can't imagine how that happened. Jessica, Safer Schools Officers. I'm going to reverse my questions, by the way, Chair. I'm going to start, Jessica, with you.
Thank you so much.
As a head teacher in London, in Southwark, as we've discovered, do you agree with the Met's decision to remove Safer School Officers, and why? And I can see the others who are both shaking their heads. So thank you for that.
In the spirit of being brutally honest, as Ashley earlier said, on behalf of those children, I think it is the single most catastrophic decision in keeping children safe in the last 10 years of my professional experience. I am crushed by it personally, and at a loss as to explain how it's happened. And I'm on all the panels. I don't feel. I have confirmed, and the person who's going to sit in my chair next, you can ask, that no consultation was done on this decision. I am a part of the Pan London Schools Safer Schools Partnership Board. It was announced to us. I expressed my surprise at that meeting, and there was surprise at my surprise. I think there are a number of things. It's not going to be undone, let's be clear. The reason for that has been largely given is budget and recruitment, and because schools are safe. And there are 2 massive issues for me. One of them speaks to the Nolan principles around transparency. There's been a question about transparency and accountability already. We were told, so what's happened is that things have continued to be cut while the blueprinting is still being done. In my BCU, there are 16 posts for DWOCYP. That's the new version, which is not based in schools at all, which does not have a shift pattern that recognises schools. So you might well be working when we are not, which doesn't have a line management structure that has a school's desk.
I'm going to stop you there on the DWOCYPs because my colleague, Assembly Member Prince, is going to come on to talk about that. But just briefly, can I ask you, in your experience...
There aren't people in the roles.
But seriously, he is going to ask those questions. I want to come back to what and I think we touched on this earlier, what is the response of young people to the removal of the Safer School officers? And earlier on, you were talking about the planned interactions and that
pressing their faces against the railings when some of our known police officers go by, saying, "Where have you been?"
Right. Okay. So generally upset.
Like people will come in, young people will come in and say, "Is Kip about?" Or, "Has anyone seen PC Megan? Is she coming in this week?" And you know that's a conversation.
Yeah.
Those are trusted people whose names they know. Now,
so would you say it's decreased trust in the police?
I think the young people who met with those people, we're about to see it, right? So it's a little bit like, it's fine this week, we can cope this week, because the memory of the people they met is still present for them.
Yeah.
But the new ones have got no memory.
No.
And, you know, there's a mix of shift patterns. There's no knowledge about where they're going to be. It's PCSOs at the bus stop, and that's not a regular set of people. The reporting structures are gone. There are continued cuts happening to the sergeants. And let me be really clear with you, this is a really important thing. The information has been compromised. There used to be a school's desk and something called daily checks. Daily checks happened every morning. As a principal and the DSL, you would get an email at 8 a.m. telling you the interactions that had happened between police and young people in the last 24 hours or over the weekend, so that you knew. That is victim and perpetrator. Those who've been exposed to domestic violence that had required police attendance. We don't get that now.
You're not getting that.
And Merlin and Chris have been, which were the systems you might well know, have been replaced with Connect, which does not have a mandatory schools reporting field, which means that even if you went to look for that information, which you can't do because there isn't a schools desk on the box, there isn't mandatory reporting of schools in a way that you can find the information, because there isn't a drop-down box on the field that requires officers to enter school details. So I am going to tell you now that I have seen an incident, and we have reported it and had it checked out, but this is the situation. We've seen an incident where I sent an attendance officer, followed by an education welfare officer, to the home of a child who was non-attending to try and get them back to school with no safety plan, because I did not know that they had been arrested and charged and released on bail for attempted murder with a bladed article. I was trying to get that child back into school with no safety plan.
And potentially also putting your member of staff who went to the house at risk.
Yeah.
If I can just come on to my other question, you just mentioned that the cuts are due to budget and also the general feeling that schools are safe. To what extent has police intervention been necessary inside schools compared with outside? Or, you know, for example, when children are travelling to and from schools, what's the balance there?
So police intervention probably fits into 3 buckets in school.
Yeah.
There has been an incident, we need to call 999. That might necessarily be not a child issue. It could be an intruder, it could be a parent, it could be whatever else has happened.
Sure.
But there's a criminal incident at school. That is relatively low on most school sites, and schools know to call 999, but that's often the data that's used because schools are relatively safe. There are 2 other types of really important interaction that happen at school. I understand that one of those is a luxury. One of them is that kind of personable intervention, ongoing, "Hi, I'm your person for assembly. Let's talk about the law and fireworks, because that's coming up. Let's talk about the law and Halloween. Let's talk about what your rights are." Those are the kind of intervention pieces. In times of scarcity of resource, potentially, if we can get the materials, teachers can deliver that. But the other one is what happens to young people who have experienced crime and need to be able to disclose or discuss in a safe place. That's really important, and we don't have that now.
So the first one, which you're saying is a sort of luxury, is the whole thing about, if you like, reassurance and also the development of the policing by consent, which is what we have in this country. Rather than lots of police with guns, we have policing by consent. So we need to have that confidence in the police.
So I once met a senior police officer at an event who said to me, "You've got to do 2 things.
Yeah.
Turn off the tap when you're under crisis, when your bathroom's flooded. Turn off the tap and pull out the plug."
Yeah.
At the moment, we've got resource to either pull out the plug or turn off the tap. But at some point, something's still going to be problematic there,
and
because
then
we're
the
not
other
putting in the
issue
grassroots.
is when something has happened and someone needs to disclose or discuss, there's nobody now available to do that. Thank you, Chair.
Yep.
Thank you, Assemblymember Cooper. Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you. I won't. You've partially answered the question anyway, in spite of Leonie's great attempts to stop you. That's great, Leonie. No problem. So I'm going to wrap two up to try and save some time. You've touched on the impact of losing a dedicated schools officer, and I think some good points have been made. I mean, obviously, children like stability. They won't have that. And I loved your analogy of the wolf. That really, to me, that really summed it up very clearly. And I'm a visual person, so you can say anything more you want to say about the loss of the officer. But how do you think the new role with the DWO becoming the youth, whatever it is, will impact?
I find it concerning that I'm in possession of the role, I think they call it the role profile, I've forgotten what the specific name is, in draft, and this role has been in place since April. So they really haven't got it sorted what that needs to look like. The shift patterns involve two different sets at the moment because they tried to put everybody onto the new shift pattern, and actually there's a flexible working issue around that. So it's very difficult for schools. I don't know, because we haven't had enough of a go at it. Like, everyone's dealing with a different line manager. There isn't a school's desk that's sorting it out. So individual head teachers might be like, oh, so I've met my SNT ward lead for this. I know who my line manager for this person is. Like, I'm going to them. That's great. But we're very clear that the role is not to come to school.
Right.
And that's not how it works. They might do, but the role is not to come to school. It's to interact with young people in high transition points, transport hubs, places where young people are. Young people are at school a lot, and going to and from school. But so I don't know, but I'm telling you now, the two most important things to me in keeping children safe are actually having access to information. Please pay for the patch on Connect so that I can understand what's happened to my children, and then I'll do the bit in school. And then we can go to a model where you're working outside that as the police. And then secondly, be clear about filling those roles. There is no minimum number of posts in those roles. They're not protected. So you can talk to people, and it's not transparent, about the fact that on my particular borough there are 16 posts for DWO CYP, but there are only 8 people and 2 of them are off sick. So, and also there are only 8 people because the others are vacancies, and there is no recruitment strategy to the vacancies. So they're intending for there to be 8. They're not intending for there to be 16 because they're not recruiting to the others, and there isn't a minimum. And if other people leave, they're not replacing them.
Yeah, I mean, an interesting point here, I don't know if you had this discussion, is if it's DWOs, they're dedicated ward officers. Well, some wards have a number of schools within them. Others have one, maybe none. In my ward, I've got at least 4 schools. So, that poor DWO is going to be running around a lot.
Yeah. And I think they've taken the decision
before you answer, the loss of the email, that I thought that was an incredibly important means of communication. So can you answer and include a bit about the email?
So I think they have got the strategy across the BCU is a bit more flexible than just saying it's one person per ward, that's it. Because you're absolutely right. But there isn't flexibility across BCUs. So Central South BCU, 16 posts, only 8 filled, 22 schools, including a Peru. Very high needs. You might have a borough or a BCU somewhere else that has a much better ratio of vacancies in those posts, but those people can't come and fill these roles. So it's not the budgetary constraints are fixed to the BCUs, but there is flexibility within the BCUs. The Safer Schools desk and the daily checks email doesn't exist anymore. They've replaced it with a system called The Box. But The Box cannot work unless crime reports on Connect record the information about young people. So if I have an interaction with you and I'm a police officer and you're a young person at 6 p.m. the night before, and something has happened, when I fill in that crime report, it's a free text box at the moment,
right?
And the solution they've come up with is tell me to fill it in. So when they went back, what they discovered is two problems. First of all, some people were writing NFA in the box, didn't ask, no further action, whoops. No one's picking that up for my school. And secondly, the name of my school might be tricky to spell. You might have misheard it. If it's a free text box and you don't put it in exactly as it is, then someone is going to have to look or do a search a number of different ways. It has to be a drop-down. It has to be a drop-down, and that's a DFE database of all the URNs. It's so easy. But I understand it has a cost implication. So until we put that patch in, no system is going to reliably pull off information because it hasn't been inserted reliably. I understand that there is a cost implication to that, and there is a cost implication to filling the DWOCYP roles. If we had 16, what I also understand from ongoing conversation in my borough about this, is if we had 16 DWOCYPs in post, they would be able to do those individual searches because they'll know their own schools and their own patches and the common spelling errors. They'll know. But we don't. So we can't. If we had a patch, the paid-for patch that would throw up the information, we could also do that. But that's sort of what I meant at the beginning. It's really difficult for me to talk about one issue at a time because the idea of withdrawing schools officers because schools are safe, but actually the recruitment not being there for the next bit, or also the trust and the neutral spaces and people coming in and the technical changes at the same time has created a perfect storm in which I am genuinely extremely worried about keeping children safe.
Thank you. I think, Chair, that's a point well worth making. Or recording around this drop-down box, or what did you call it?
I don't have access to Connect, so I can't see it.
No, right.
But this is what I've understood is it is a free text field and it isn't mandated.
Right. So the point there is, I think we should raise that with the Met.
Thank you, Assembly Member Prince. That's noted. Thank you. Have you finished your questioning? Yes, right, thank you. Assembly Member Bailey, I'm afraid we've only left you with 5 minutes before the next panel comes in.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go to something Omar said, because it seemed you said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm probing here. Earlier on, you seemed to say that parents don't understand where young people's coming from, and it gave the distinct impression that the voice of parents wasn't particularly important. And in my head, what's disappointing about all of these conversations with the Met, and particularly this conversation here, is the lack of parents, because there's a hierarchy in my head about who gets to do what with children, who's most responsible. Jessica will be very, very high up that list because she leads a school, but even Jessica will be second to a parent. So if I, as a parent, think something is right, it is right, because it's my legal and moral duty until I transgress the law, and then you can come wading in. So how am I wrong? Were you saying that the voice of parents is not important, or you take the voice of young people above that? And separate to that, do you try to incorporate the voice of parents? And I want to be focused here, not the community of parents. Do you even recognise the voice?
Yeah, I recognise the voice of parents. I'd first of all like to apologise for giving that impression. Parents are important. We need parents to get them into schools. We need parents to be there to help young people and to raise them, quite frankly. And so what I would like to clarify is that we work with young people primarily. It's what our mandate is. And so, yes, we incorporate and listen to the voices of parents, especially when it comes to their child in particular. But what I was directly referring to is that quite often the wants of parents and the wants of young people separate. The idea of a police officer in schools is quite controversial amongst adults. To young people, it's a want, and that's perhaps where a lot of difficulty in your decision-making is going to come from is, do you want to encourage a young person to feel safe to report an incident that's happened to them on the way to or from school or at home? And what is a parent's response to just the idea of a police officer in a school and what they imagine that role might be? If a parent believes that police officers are going into classrooms and policing behaviour, and that's not what's happening, that's going to be a point of contention amongst that decision that needs to be clarified with parents as well as young people. That's what my answer was primarily about. And so, yes, we do speak with parents, particularly over the summer holidays. We've had summer camps that is outside of school hours, and so we do speak with parents as to what they feel comfortable and informing them as to what's happening. And as for does it rank above, I feel that's a loaded question that perhaps I don't feel comfortable answering yes or no, simply because all voices are considered, and that's how we come to a consensus. Saying someone is more important than somebody else isn't a value of Hope in Haringey. That's why we work with everybody we can do to make decisions and to come to a consensus as to how we move forward. Hope that answers your question more directly.
Yes, thank you. This is a question I'll start with probably again with you, Omar. How do you filter out the usual suspects? I've been a youth worker for about 38 years now, and certain voices in our community are much louder than others, not always helpful. For instance, you've said that the idea of a police officer in school is controversial. For most parents, it probably isn't, but for the parents with the loudest voice, it may well be. These are just my personal feelings on that. How do you have a mechanism? I'll come to you as well, Ashley. Do you have a mechanism for trying to hear beyond the people who are easiest to find or will come and look for you?
Yes, we speak with young people. We speak with people directly. As for filtering, I find that's an interesting imagery because it implies that we have the access to speak to everybody. That's not necessarily the case. Like I said, we speak with a young person and we engage their parents, we engage their schools, we engage everybody who is involved in their upbringing as best as we can. Mm-hmm. And so where there are people that we don't work with, they wouldn't be part of our conversation in terms of making a key strategic decision simply because we haven't spoken with them. And so to be as fair as I can to your opinion without seeming like I'm disagreeing or trying to make it larger than what it is in terms of how I'm imagining it, I think what you're asking is how do we separate those who are going to be disruptors from those who want to contribute to the conversation going forward? And that's really a case-by-case basis. If there is a loud voice that has the ear of a school, that is a different conversation that we would have than if it was a broader community meeting which we've been asked to attend or are participating in. Because primarily we're working with young people, listening to their concerns and trying to directly address their concerns with and about the police. And that's the best that we can do on a day-to-day basis, and that is to start that conversation case by case, school by school, and growing it from there.
Thank you. I'll come to you, Ashley, and let me clarify, just to make sure, this isn't about filtering, it's the complete opposite of that. It's about broadening, because if you run any kind of community organisation, there is a tendency to be captured or to go to people easy to find, or there's a silent majority on almost everything who can't be found, young people, different community groups, parents. Are you aware of this? Do you try to outperform that conundrum?
Yeah, so definitely for me, I mean, my work is primarily with young people in the sense that I don't actually have much interaction with the parents themselves. I work with 16 to 24, so unless it is between the ages of 16 to 18 where we have parents' consent just to get them involved in things, that's kind of where it stops for us and me. In terms of, yes, like louder voices, and there are always going to be ones that are not so kind of prominent, that definitely resonates with my work in the sense that, like you said, there's young people. There are always going to be people that are louder in a young people's group than others, and my work particularly is to work with diverse communities across England and Wales, but as well, of course, in London, as we're talking about here today. And for me, what I do a lot of work by going into communities that are disengaged, and that is hard work. I'm not going to lie, it's very hard work. Sometimes we trial different things and it fails, and sometimes we have to continue and try something completely different or put it on pause and try rethink. And I think the things that I've learned along the way is, one, to not give up, and two, is really just try to engage as many people as possible by being approachable, by learning about different communities in terms of whether it's neurodivergence, whether it's people with kind of from different minoritized backgrounds. Those are the kind of things that my work really does focus on, in making sure that we have a diverse variety of young people's voices involved in our work, and being able to manage those as well that are a lot more louder and more prominent in the discussions that we have around young people. And that's something that's really important to me, yeah.
Thank you for acknowledging that it's difficult and you have to rethink. I think a lot of people talk about these things as you can just book a meeting and it'll turn up. Yeah. I'm going to come to you, Jessica. Are parents aware of these changes? Do they feel impacted by these changes? What have their response been to these changes? How are your parents feeling in general about the safety of their children, not only in your environment? Because one of the things that's very striking about our notes is that more children feel safe in school than they do at home. And you'd be probably one of the interfaces who'd have to do all that. So how are parents in general, and how are you approaching this on their behalf?
I think I was really kind of wrestling with your previous question, actually, because I think one of the things we have to remember is that today's children are tomorrow's adults, right? And they're tomorrow's parents. So there's a case-by-case basis, which means that I have got parents who are a bit like, can we not see PC Kip again, case by case? The answer is no, I'm really sorry. But let's see what we can do in that space. The changes went through in April. Schools move into fairly hefty exam mode from sort of May onwards, which means that we then also lose 2 cohorts. We lose slight sight of them in quite the same way. And then, of course, we've come back this week. So I don't think the impact is being realised fully for people beyond the individuals at the moment. So the individuals are beginning to feel, hang on, this is a person I built trust with. And that is absolutely speaking, to the answers given by previous panellists about resistant communities, people who've then invested, built trust, had a good experience, etc. They'll ask for the same person, definitely. We are 100%, words of advice is a really important thing for us. It is, you have done something pretty bad. In the real world, that's a criminal offence. I need you to understand that from someone that's not me. And also, I really need you not to be criminalised right now because you're a child and you get to make mistakes. So words of advice is a core function of having an attached police officer to your establishment. We now call families and say, can you give consent for that? We're going to try and call our local police officers. They will make contact with you separately. That's a mess. We are trusted as the broker if we're not there as the broker because DWO, CYP don't necessarily work through school hours, etc. The answer is often no. So that's difficult. But I do think that your previous question around what do we do with parents who are like, absolutely not, no way, that is also case by case. And you work and you are tenacious and resilient and persistent and you just keep going. But we're setting ourselves up for a whole next gen of parents feeling the same way because they won't have met police officers, they won't have trust in police officers, they will have had bad experiences. Overwhelmingly, the families who say absolutely not, no way, they are people who have had poor experiences for a range of reasons, maybe through poor choices, but a lot through being disadvantaged and not having good experiences in their own past with policing. Not necessarily the Met, could have been in other nations as well as other places in the country. But we're setting ourselves up for tomorrow with a problem there.
Thank you.
I'm terribly sorry. Thank you. Thank you very much, Assembly Member Bailey.
I just want to add one more
I'm really sorry. We've got a second panel now coming in. You've all given such detailed answers, and it's been really wonderful listening to you, and thank you for sharing your experiences. And if there is anything that you wanted to add, Omar, please, could you write in to us? I mean, Jeanette could speak to you.
It feels like we'd all be happy
that.
to be back if that was helpful.
I'm sure at some point, because I suspect this will be an issue that we visit again in the future. So thank you to our first panel for joining us and for today's discussion. We're now adjourned for 2 minutes before welcoming our second panel of guests. Thank you very much. Right, welcome back to the Police and Crime Committee. We are running a little bit late, and can I thank our second panel for you just bearing with us. I am very aware that Commander Patel is going to have to leave quite shortly as well, but thank you for the time that we have with you. So we'll now continue our discussion in neighbourhood policing and the experiences of young people, and I'd like to welcome our second panel, who've been waiting patiently, Commander Nirav Patel, who is local policing for the Metropolitan Police Service, Superintendent Matt Cott from the Metropolitan Police Service, Dean Neville, Senior Policy and Commissioning Manager for the Mayor's Office for Police and Crime MOPAC, and Gary Connors, Assistant Director for the Violence Reduction Unit. Thank you very much. So the first question is about, and our first section with this panel is about the Met's Child First approach. And Assembly Member Duval to ask the first question, please.
OK, can we begin with our colleagues from the MPS, and then we'll take the other two contributors in following on. So how is the Met's Child First approach making a difference to children and young people in London? And what evidence do you have to support this, in particular at the neighbourhood team level? Who wants to begin?
Yeah, obviously, so you'll be aware that the Children's First strategy, I think, was launched just around about 12 months ago now, so at that 12-month point. So we are really in that development phase at the moment. One of the key points is raising the awareness within the organisation around what that actually means to officers on the ground, because I think you'll all be very familiar with the fact that the Child First strategy is all around ensuring that we as police officers look at children as children first when we're dealing with them within many sets of circumstances. So one of the key bits around that is the new Met for London training phase 2, where there is a half day's worth of input to every police officer in the Met, currently being rolled out to, well, frontline police officers, so 23,000 police officers across the Met. To really upskill them in the knowledge of what that Child First strategy means, but how to actually turn that into a reality on the street. I think to your further question about how do we know it's working at the moment, I think we're probably not in that space in terms of metrics, and I can hand over to MOPAC colleagues when we get there as well. But we need to understand and work through the metrics of what that success looks like. But as you can imagine, this is a significant strategy with a large amount of training and awareness that needs to sit behind it. And the first priority is absolutely to bring our officers up to speed in terms of what that looks like. So I think it is something that will mature over time. We don't have the metrics at the moment to measure the impact.
I'll just add a few words to Matt's explanation there. So Matt's obviously referenced the fact that we have invested in our training approach to our officers under the new Met for London training delivery. I think there's two specific areas to probably reference there that are quite relevant to the question that you've asked. So adultification is a key concern and is a key element of the education that we're giving our officers. We know that there's a real risk that, generally speaking, we can assume somebody's age or assume their life experiences might mean that they're streetwise, for example, that we can assume there's a certain way to treat or engage with somebody based on their life experiences or the walk of life that they have come from. And this is really to test that thinking and to test the dangers of making those assumptions and not seeing the child first, which is really at the heart of our child first strategy. And the other is considering the complexities of harm that children might be exposed to. The world around us is constantly changing. Social media is probably a good one to reference here, and the hidden harms that children might be exposed to that might not be already or visibly apparent when we come across a child in the street, for example, or domestic abuse at home. So there's lots of things that wouldn't necessarily be apparent when we engage with children out on the street, but the training aims to surface the complexity of those issues and really open our neighbourhoods officers' minds up to the complexity of engaging with young people in a really considered way. So just wanted to provide a little bit of detail around the kinds of issues that we're looking to discuss and surface with our officers during those training sessions.
Okay, and before we move on to the other colleagues, so this development phase, when do you think that comes to an end? Give me a timescale on this. I know it's fairly new and we're in, but when do we think that's there? And allied to that, when do we think that we'll be able to look at the performance? And let me give you an example, what I'm looking for. So your switch from from designated police officers in schools to actually, no, we're moving outside the school, the way it's been described to us, and concentrating on the home-to-school journey, the bus hubs, the transport issues, the safety of young people at that time. How are we going to measure that performance? Give us some of the thinking around that very quickly before we go to your other colleagues to answer this question.
Yeah, if I have an attempt at answering the first part of your question around the when. So our New Met for London training is currently going on as we speak. The challenge is the abstractions of how you train such a vast amount of officers while servicing the day-to-day priorities of policing London, especially with the challenges that we face across the capital in the current context and the summer period. But we have a training plan. We are sticking to it as closely as possible. I will have to come back to you on when we estimate the training for New Met for London to be complete, and therefore the input that's included around the Child First strategy, and give you an indication of when our ambitions of training our frontline officers, which includes our neighbourhood officers, is going to be complete. I would estimate it will be at some point in the next calendar year, the quarter 4 of this performance year. But I will have to come back to the panel on that. And I'll hand over to Matt for the second part of your question, if that's okay.
Perfect, thank you. Sorry. Can you hear me okay? Yep, good. So I think there's just 2 bits to clarify in that. The Child First strategy is obviously pan-London around our approach to how we put the needs of a child first, either in terms of identifying victimisation and dealing with situations proportionately and in the interest of the child first. The schools change, whilst occurring alongside that, is one very small minor cog of that, and I know you'll be aware of that as a panel. So just wanted to set that out first and foremost, is that Child First encompasses all of public protection and our approaches to public protection, all of our frontline police officers, including emergency response, neighbourhood officers, and other people who are coming in contact with children, and how they all look at people, at children from that victim first approach. When we talk about the schools change and the measuring of that, I think that is that is in development still. That's something I'm working with MOPAC to do, but very much this is around embedding the 371 officers that were schools officers into ward teams as the children and young person specialist, and then working with those wider ward teams and other units, including our safer transport teams, in a more cohesive way to deliver for the safety of children out in the wider community, not in the schools. So the metrics that I'm looking at in terms of that are around the most impactful crimes to young people, including the neighbourhood crime types, violence with injury as an example, robbery, theft. Do we, by making that change, have a positive impact on those crime metrics in terms of that age demographic? So that's the scope of it. There's a secondary piece there around, obviously, trust and confidence, but we firmly believe that by actually delivering better in our communities for those young people in that transition phase between home and school, school and home, and not just in that space, but this is about young person's safety in the community all of the time, whether that's in their parks, the open spaces, and we have to look at both the safety and crimes perpetrated by young people as well. The change to the schools model and moving it into a neighbourhoods model is focused on that. So I think that's where the primary focus of the metrics will be.
I could have chosen another example of missing young people. We talked about assumptions that have been made and some of the problems that we've had in the past. It'd be interesting to hear that. Maybe you could write to the committee about that particular issue, about how, at neighbourhood level, that you are training those officers to deal with the missing person piece, which we know has been crucial to our young people, and maybe include some of the assumptions. Let's go to Mopac quickly and begin with you, because they're telling us work about some of these issues around performance issues. When can we see and when can we evaluate the performance of some of these changes, and what's your view on timescales as well?
So picking up on that, I think there's a reason that the Met have adopted a child-first approach, and that links to what the evidence tells us, that a child-first approach leads to preventing offending, fewer victims, safer communities, and improving trust and confidence. So over this 5-year strategy, they are the things that we'll be looking to see. With regards to the commitments, what we've got within that is a 5-year strategy. There are 5 strategic outcomes that are identified within that children's strategy, and there are 36 commitments that are made within that. The London Policing Board is the primary mechanism for holding the Met to account for the delivery of that, and the Met have made a commitment to sharing that dashboard with that will provide an update on the implementation and the progress of delivery of that children's strategy. So that will be shared ahead of the London Policing Board later this year. So regards to timescales, with regards to that dashboard, that was committed to the London Policing Board at a previous London Policing Board.
Okay, you're much more politer in terms of some of the changes that are brought about by why the police have had to change in terms of some of the things that this committee, and over the years, I've had a privilege to be part of this assembly over the years in listening to some of the policing endeavours on young people, and it's not been great. So it's interesting you put that. If we can go down to detail now about this work. So Mopac, in overseeing this work with the Metropolitan Police, is there. Can you just describe, so you say about the policing board, which I get, I understand, and I think, all power to everyone doing scrutiny over this process in terms of driving change and the right outcomes in tackling crime, to be honest, is... can you just describe how Mopac does oversee this change process around that? So exactly, how many meetings do you have with the Metropolitan Police over this issue, and particularly around, given that safer neighbourhood policing is a crucial priority, we're told by the Mayor of London, how does this work? Can you just describe it to us very quickly?
Could actually, to be specific around the issue, I think we started around like talking about the children's strategy more broadly, and then the specific bits around the Safer Schools Officer.
I want you to relate that back to safer neighbourhood policing and frontline policing around that and the changes that are there. So in terms of the new Met for London is about the change agenda. I need to understand that, and I need to know how it's driving performance and how we're all going to become safer. And in this particular issue, our younger people are going to become safer. So
to give a specific on how we kind of engage across that, obviously the new Met for London cuts across all of Mopac's work there. There's consistent engagement around key sort of like thematics around children and young people, so around the children's strategy, around the adoption of a child-first approach, around the implementation of key commitments such as the implementation of child-first training across all kind of Met officers. We're involved in elements such as reviewing the content of that training, reviewing, kind of like overseeing the delivery of that, observing that. So there are kind of like, you've got the macro and then there's down into the detail, which will then cut across into specific areas. So such as my team there's the elements that will then cut across like safer schools. So it's across all of our work, but to give specifics on number of meetings would be something that...
With all due respect, in everything you've just told me, not one word have you mentioned about partnership with others that are working with other young people that are actually... We've got the crime fighters in front of us. They're equally crime fighting and making children safe. what is MOPAC's role in building some of those partnerships? Because you have some of those oversights and subcommittees in terms of actually supporting the police in their activities around that, and also changing some of the attitudes and cultural approach of the policing about tackling crime, that they alone are not the only crime fighters. There are other people keeping people safe. So where does MOPAC fit into that?
100%, and across those different issues, it will be different approaches. So for the transition of the Safer Schools officers into dedicated ward officers and that wider remit across communities, that's about how do we engage and bring in wider partners. So London Safeguarding, Children Exec, how do we bring those guys in? And that's something that we've done with this change to make sure that they're scrutinising that, they're scrutinising the job profile that goes with that, they're scrutinising the training that will be implemented as part of that change to ensure that that's implemented. They're scrutinising the handbook that go with that, that will provide the clarity and the consistency that was lacking sort of like previously. So yeah, there's bringing in those range of partners that will be specific to the individual sort of issues and focus areas.
Okay. If we move to you, Gary, the VIU, emphasis on the longer-term approach, learning lessons, what works, and then trying to influence others to introduce best practice. Tell us what you're doing and how you're working in terms of, along this new approach to policing.
Yeah, understood. I mean, obviously, I think you've just said, Assembly Member Deval, the whole of the VRU's focus is child-first approach. So obviously, we absolutely welcome the Met strategy on this. Of course, we would. I think, as you've heard earlier from Met colleagues and MOPAC colleagues, it is in development. So we're working along closely with them, I guess, to hopefully give a bit of reassurance about how we sort of embed. So we've got very close alignments with, I suppose, our community safety partnership colleagues on boroughs, so bringing all those partners together, but obviously wider, our health, the young people, communities, police colleagues, fire colleagues, TfL, etc. Whilst we have those wider relationships through our partnership reference group, the mayor chairs, and we look at offering together, what we do on a sort of more granular level is we, over the last couple of years, have developed what's called Violence and Vulnerability Reduction Action Plans. So we develop action plans across partnerships. And so we're effectively, I think, over the past year, we're starting to challenge those plans to see how much are they embedding the child-first approach, so how much are they embedding that new police work, and we'll start challenging it that way. We did have some early involvement, obviously on the development around the plan, Voices of Young People, our Young People's Action Group, etc. as well. But I think what we've been doing over the past year is we also hold regular meetings with Community Safety Partnership chairs, with lead members from Children's and Community Safety, and we give our police colleagues a regular seat at the table on those. So we try to obviously ensure there's a position where they can constantly embed the development of the plan over the past year.
Could you write to this committee about some of those issues in a bit more detail, and also about some future thinking about how that you're going to support those colleagues in that, and where, and particularly how they work with their partners? Because clearly this is all developmental, you've told me that. At some stage we've got to start looking at the performance to see what works, and no doubt you'll be adapting and making some changes. It'll be helpful to us. Chair, I think I've covered all the topics. If I'm not, I'm quite happy for you to have picked up anything that I've missed.
Thank you, Assemblymember Duval. Just going back to the issue of partnerships, so we've heard the MOPAC side of it and the VRU side of it. Just wonder from the Met, could you tell us how you're encouraging partnerships to work at a neighbourhood level with young people and children?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So obviously, we've got the macro level, which is the London-wide level, and the partnership boards that sit and drive strategy at the top level. At the local level, and just to give you some context, so I was the Deputy SRO for the schools change and know the background to that, but I'm also, in my day job, a superintendent.
Sorry, come on, Superintendent Cox, what's an SRO? And
Sorry,
I'm forever
Senior
picking
Responsible
up
Officer for the project. Yes, my apologies, and well pointed out. But yes, in my day job, I am a borough superintendent within Camden Policing. So I'm very much at the front line of delivery of this as well. So to operationalise and contextualise it, if you look at what we do in Camden and take that as a wider scale around partnership, we are very much linked in directly with our local authority. So I work really closely with Children and Young Services and our Community Safety Partnership at that local level. The local authority lead, and we are a key partner in a Children and Young Persons board, which sits monthly with quarterly reviews of strategy, and that absolutely draws in all of our partners, both statutory partners and third sector partners, who all have an interest in the safety and well-being of young people. And the power of that is really twofold. One is that we get a good cross-communication around what we're all trying to do, but more importantly for me, it takes different organisations into different spaces that they wouldn't normally think about. So when we are talking about a neighbourhoods approach to young people, and we are hearing about, for example, a charity within the south of Camden, which is focused on improving educational and career development opportunities for young people within a Somali community and the specific challenges there. All of that feeds back into what we're doing. So I'm very confident at a local level, I know I'm talking from my own personal experience in my own area, that partnership working is really well entrenched and is delivering and continues to deliver. We can go back to the measurement and outputs of that, but the connectivity is absolutely there.
Thank you, and thank you for those examples. Moving on to the next section, which is youth engagement and police cadets. Assemblymember Garbett.
Thank you. So in the first panel, we heard a lot about the difference between individual officers versus the system, which I thought was really interesting. So some kind of positive relationships of individual officers, but not kind of being convinced that that goes back into the wider Met. So the questions here are around how the work of the youth engagement officer, which was seen as quite a positive post, and the diversion officers be continued in part of the wider neighbourhood policing.
Yeah, of course. I don't know whether the committee is aware that the youth engagement diversion officer posts were removed under the tough choices decisions that were made earlier this year to meet budgetary requirements that the Met had to deliver on to make us an affordable design. In reviewing that, the role of the youth engagement and diversion officer was looked at in great detail to understand what it did in terms of our core policing responsibilities and how it worked into what we are now trying to deliver as an organisation in terms of crime reduction, safeguarding, and what our core policing responsibilities are. The reality of it was when we looked at it in detail, I think if we would all argue that in a time of luxury, we would have those officers probably in place, and they would have been delivering engagement work at an individual level and partnership work as well. But the reality, when we looked at the evidence base of what they had been delivering, and to quote the children's strategy as well, this is about making sure that policing is able to deliver core policing priorities, and that other agencies that are best positioned to support young people in terms of diversion are stepping forward and taking on that work. So there are elements, and you talk to the individual relationships around building with young people and diversionary work. So some of that work in terms of diversionary is now reverted to signposting. I think if we were honest, we would have been investing too much in the individual level where other agencies are or should be stepping forward to deliver that work. But more widely, there was a lot of activity in terms of networking and building trust and confidence with young people through activities which, if you looked at it in the stark reality of what police officers are paid to do, carrying the warrant card, we had police officers that were spending a lot of time in supporting voluntary activities by other agencies, and I think the public would genuinely question whether that was a valuable use of warranted police officer time. So to answer your question, quite a lot of those activities in terms of the individual diversion or supporting other organisations in delivering diversionary activity to policing have ceased from the point of view of the YEDOs. Some of the activity in terms of maintaining those networks with young groups that are interested and support the benefits of developing young people. We still have that connectivity through the neighbourhood ward teams, and the Somali group that I talked about earlier on is one really good local example of that. But we also have to look at what our other partners and other organisations provide in that space. So yes, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. And just on youth engagement, another point from Liberty's report on policing the playground says that the more contact with young people the police have, the more likely young people's actions will be recorded as crimes. I'm just wondered how that's been taken through your youth engagement work or the child strategy.
Yeah, so that was one of the pivotal points in terms of how we work through the Safer Schools changes. I think it's really important to make the point to this panel that there were two different things. The youth engagement diversion officers was a tough choice decision, which meant a reduction in posts and a removal of that role. The Safer Schools changes were a strategic decision based on evidence very much like that.
We're going to come on to Safer Schools officers in a minute. It was more just like how you ensure that in that youth engagement it's not recorded as crime, just specifically,
right,
rather
okay.
than the officers.
Yeah, okay. Certainly schools have very clear guidance in terms of what to report and not what to report, and that sits within their safeguarding children policy. The name completely escapes me at the moment. However, you'll be aware that we do have an obligation under Home Office rules to record crimes when they are brought to our attention, and that isn't something that we have flexibility in. So when a crime is brought to our attention, they would be recorded because we're obliged to do that and committed to doing that. However, how we deal with those crimes afterwards is a really important piece. And when you looked at the data for the schools officers, and I draw that because that's the easiest data to work from, it was around about 95% of recorded crime that was recorded by schools officers or occurred in schools had an outcome which was non-judicial, because the right people were looking at those crimes and taking the right action with partners to mitigate the risks. So I think that's a really important point.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Small-Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. The Mayor has committed to funding 250,000 more positive opportunities for young Londoners, as well as investing in youth workers in schools, pupil referral units, custody centres and major A&Es. Where does neighbourhood policing fit into that investment? And I'll come to MOPAC and the VRU.
Yeah, certainly I'll come in first. Thank you, Assembly Member. So specifically, where does policing come into that?
Neighbourhood policing.
Neighbourhood policing come into that, yeah. So certainly through, certainly from the VRU side, obviously, it's a sort of City Hall investment in those 250,000, but certainly from the VRU perspective, and again, I mentioned some of those partnerships earlier in a previous answer. So some of that will be through the specific resource, first of all. Some of those opportunities will be through mentoring, some of it inclusive education, so our oracy work and communication work, etc. But also we put quite a bit into sport, which we involved in our local partners, which include police partners. There's quite a bit of work we put into after-school provision and investment. We've done, outside of this, the investment that's been discussed here, we've also done a lot of work over the past year around robbery in top 15 boroughs, and all that includes our neighbourhood police colleagues. You know, essentially a lot of that can't be done on the borough partnerships without police engagement in those areas effectively. So we certainly see it threaded through there. We have, as the committee are probably incredibly aware, that we have a really strong flagship My Ends programme in a number of our boroughs, which is obviously community-led consortiums. That absolutely needs police engagement in those. You know, we as a quick example, we took the policing minister on a visit to our My Ends in Brixton just before the summer, and one of the really positive aspects that came back from that was just that embeddedness in an area which has some historical mistrust in the police. Certainly the response back about that linkage is in with those local police officers there, both directly but also with young people feeling that they could talk to trusted adults to then engage with police to report crimes or just look for safety and security. So I think that the reality, and apologies if it's a bit brief, throughout all of those provisions where we support either VCS organisations or community consortiums or also local authorities, police officers on each of those boroughs are generally involved in the partnership response. And sorry, we then record that in the action plans I mentioned earlier. We look for the boroughs to record that, any of that work.
So the primary focus of those positive opportunities is that earlier intervention. So a large bulk of that will sit in sync with the violence reduction unit work, as Gary has described there. Where there are kind of like wider sort of like interventions, it's all about ensuring that actually for every child that engages with a professional, whether that be through children's social care, through police, that there are networks that are tied in around that. And that's MOPAC's focus through organisations and networks such as London Children's Safeguarding Board, working with local partners and those local networks to ensure that they are coordinated, so that is kind of each of those touch points are minimised and connected at a neighbourhood level. But the primary focus, the large scale, 250,000, is more working at that earlier engagement stage that Gary described.
Thank you both. I'll come back to you again. Could you please update the committee on the work of the Divert programme, and particularly how is the effectiveness of Divert being evaluated?
I'll pass over to you, Gary.
That'll be me, Assembly Member. Yes, so the Divert. So we have, and again, apologies, the Assembly may well know someone, and I'm happy to send information afterwards if it's helpful. So the Violence Reduction Unit funds and supports 2 programmes. So we have the Engage programme, which is essentially embeds those skilled and trained youth workers from up to 18 in custody suites, and then the Divert programme is 18 to 25, effectively. So we commission an organisation called Bounce Back that runs the 18 to 25, but for the up to 18s, which hopefully would make logical sense, we support the boroughs through social workers and their social children's services, effectively. We have, over the time of the scheme, I think we supported 10,000 young people. Obviously, it's consensual if young people want to be involved. It is. And I think importantly, which is sometimes slightly confused because we work very closely with our police colleagues as partners on this, we cover all of the BCUs in custody suites. So we're not in every custody suite, but they cover all the BCUs. But they are independent of the police investigation and the police process. So they are youth workers in there in that reachable, teachable moment. We're still reviewing some of the impact of the over 18s, but certainly in the under 18s, when we looked at earlier this year, some evaluation work is, I think, 77%, almost 80% of young people that had seen a youth worker hadn't gone on to reoffend within 12 months. And again, sorry, happy to take any supplementaries. I don't know if you need any more.
I just guess maybe this is one for MOPAC as well, but in what ways are you assisting them in embedding more youth workers in the neighbourhood work of the police?
I mean, certainly to come back from myself again, just to follow on from what I said. Again, I probably should have said there as well. A lot of this, and some of the other programmes we run through the VRU are also depending on. We've been very lucky to have Home Office funding in the past, so depending on some funding to expand further. So obviously we have gone back with some of our evaluatory work. We speak with the Home Office on a regular basis. Again, police colleagues, MOPAC colleagues and others obviously support the work around our Divert and Engage schemes. The idea is that we want to expand this even further. So obviously, again, we expanded it further. It's in linking with more police colleagues. We have been, and again, it's been led by the police, to be fair, not by the VRU, but we've been instrumental in supporting the police on developing their first child first custody suite in North London, and that's it's different obviously to Engage and Divert, but it's about how the police develop that, and so they've taken a lot of learning from our Divert programme on how to embed that and how to embed that culture and practice. So I think in that way we're working hand in hand with more and more custody suites to at least train up police officers in the way we're developing this.
Thank you. And Superintendent, would you say you see the benefits of kind of more youth workers within the community and that having a positive impact on neighbourhood policing?
So I think that's a really difficult question to answer because in terms of policing, normally what would happen is we would look at opportunities to identify vulnerable children through either neighbourhoods policing or more likely our public protection approach and the multi-agency safeguarding hubs, and then put those referrals in for the right activity and diversion to take place. So I think you've got 2 different groups. You've got the youth workers and the police. At a local level, there will be connectivity because we will be, certainly through neighbourhood policing, we will be attending venues where activities go because we want to build those links with those workers, but also with the young people that they're working with. But the main bulk of the work will be through a referral process and ensuring that the young people that are most vulnerable are getting the help and support they need through that funding. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Best.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back to the Divert programme. Has there been a reduction in reoffending following the Divert programme? There was an evaluation done by the College of Policing. Have you seen a reduction in reoffending?
We've seen reductions in reoffending. I don't have the figures here, but certainly it's slightly more difficult in the over 18 cohort, I guess.
Yes, but that's the Divert core.
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
over
So we're talking
18,
about
25.
Divert. We're not talking about Engage.
Yeah, about Divert.
Okay.
Yeah, we've seen reductions. I don't have the figures on me.
So you've seen a reduction in the Divert core.
Yeah, but we're still evaluating it effectively. It's still in evaluation.
Okay.
We have seen some in our gathering of intelligence, and gathering data.
Okay, because the last evaluation done by the College of Policing in 2021 noted that the participants were more likely to reoffend in the Divert group than in the control group. So you think we've moved on since that point?
Yes.
And what do you think has changed in the Divert programme to address perhaps those shortcomings, or whatever was it, perhaps not meaning that the programme wasn't working as well as intended?
Understood, yeah. I think partly, going back to the last question, I think partly that development of that relationship with the police, not just the police, but I think some of the essentially development of relationships with the organisation that runs this back into their local partners, having, I suppose, established better links with local partners. Again, some through the VRU, but obviously some developing their local partnerships themselves. It's just about developing better avenues and pathways for those young people, those 18 to 25s in Divert. I think that's developed a lot, and we've put a lot of focus on that. And again, we push and we ask a lot of the local partnerships. Again, I'm from a local authority, so I understand how it works in the local partnerships, but we ask a lot of questions of local partnership. How are they in all their organisations supporting Divert? So Divert isn't just left as a standalone piece of work, essentially. How does it link in to the wider plans? I think that's made a big difference over the last couple of years anyway.
Okay, thank you. And do you know when we can expect to see the figures or the data that shows that Divert is now working?
Yeah, I apologise. I don't have the date for the evaluation. I will come back to the committee. I'm sorry.
Do you think we'll see this year? Or you're saying you've seen that, so I'm sure that...
I'm seeing early indications, so I'm seeing data as it comes in. I'm waiting for the evaluation to come in.
So and when will we expect that?
I don't have the data, I apologise.
So we
I can come back.
Confidently say that it is working?
I can't give you the data today in that sense.
But you're confident, you don't have any data to share with us, but you're confidently saying it is working, even though the last set of data showed it wasn't. And
Yes.
you can't tell me when we will see data.
I understand that, I apologise. Yes.
And it's a scheme that's been over £3 million spent on it.
Yes, I get it. I don't have the data for you today.
Or a date for when we can see the data.
No, I will have to come back to the date.
That's a mess. Thank you, Chair.
And could you write to us
Yes.
when you have that? First of all, if you could write to us fairly soon to let us know when that data and evaluation will be available, when the evaluation will finish, and then follow up with the results of the evaluation as well, please, Gary.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. If I could follow up as well then, Dean or Gary, in what ways are you assisting them, in what specific ways is the VRU and the Youth People's Action Group engaging with neighbourhood policing teams?
I think certainly from a VRU perspective, again, I won't keep repeating what I've said in some of the other answers, but we link in directly with the local partners. So from the VRU perspective, we link in generally with your sort of heads of children's services, your heads of community safety, but we also link in with superintendents in each of the BCUs in each of the boroughs. So we link in on a regular basis, speaking to those. I have an embedded police officer, and a police officer's embedded part of the week in the VRU as well, at inspector level, who links in with Safer Neighbourhoods. Essentially, we look to engage them in any and all of our plans as we go out. And obviously, we expect them to tell us where they're working across their VCS and youth groups as well, in any of those local partnerships. The Young People's Action Group we have links in with police colleagues at senior and sometimes local level. Obviously, there's a finite number of young people on that board, but we have a seat at a lot of tables with senior police colleagues, looking at how the plans develop, how the Youth First strategy develops, etc. as well.
Yeah, so obviously it's a Young People's Action Group engaging with neighbourhood policing teams we're interested in. So for what you're saying, this is quite the Young People's Action Group, that's more high level with senior officers because of a finite number of people involved in that board. Is there any way in which to open that up, expand that, so that more young people can get involved at a local level with neighbourhood policing teams? I mean, essentially, I see this with the Safer Neighbourhood boards or Safer Neighbourhood panels. Occasionally, because we hold ours in a school, young people have come, and I don't know for anyone that's been to one of those panels, they are quickly put off to coming again.
Yeah. Absolutely, and yeah, I've experienced and sat in many of those panels, different boroughs. Obviously, there are some boroughs, as you probably know, have developed youth standalone panels as well. They work to varying degrees, I think, depending on the borough. But specifically on your question, Assembly Member, on our Young People's Action Group, one of the pieces of work that colleagues in the team are bringing through this year is to somehow get that wider voice, so a wider voices piece, so we can involve more young people who don't actually sit as full YPAG members, but can be engaged in a wider network, and just about how we're literally trying to develop how we expand on that at the moment, so it does give a wider voice to other young people that want to get involved. And essentially, yeah, it'll be led through our Young People's Action Group, and I suppose splintered out, spoked out into different communities, so try to involve a lot more young people in there. Specifically, how that will engage with neighbourhood policing, I don't have the answer at the moment.
Do you mind if I come in to help with that answer? I think you've drawn out a really important point there. You know, youth engagement has been a challenge for the police for some considerable time. I think, you know, it's saying I've not been to the panel that you talked about, but I can empathise with young people that have attended police and partnership panels in the past, because we are probably not in the youth mindset in terms of how do we actually engage and pique their interest, and we're, you know, like many organisations, quite staid in the way that we do things. I think the challenge for us in policing is trying to work through what is the best mechanism to hear young people's voices in a way in which they want to engage. And some of the best examples I've seen is where it's almost been done in a third-party forum. And to quote the example of Camden, the youth partnership boards there, each and every one of those meetings, young people are invited to both come in and present on the things that are important to them. And it's often quite inspiring that they've got the bravery to deliver in those groups, but often that generates much more conversation and connectivity than when we invite people into, for example, mainstream IAGs or Safer Neighbourhoods boards, which are run in a certain way. So I think there is a lot of room to improve on that, if I'm really straight up. But we need to build on what we've got and speak to people who are experts from local authorities, VRU, the like, about how better to do that and do it in a different way to how we've done it historically.
And dare I say, schools officers was a great way in which you could have that connection and have that input. My follow-up question was as well about how neighbourhood policing teams are working with police cadets. Again, another function where we've seen funding cut.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, if we put the Safer Schools piece to one side, yes, there was a connectivity there, and there still is. Remember, we still have the children and young persons officers. They're just not embedded into the schools 7 days a week. So that connectivity is absolutely still there with the schools. In terms of the cadet piece, yes, you're right to say, you know, we have, again, made tough choices around both the funding and the scale of the cadet programme against both the challenge of funding and, you know, having the infrastructure in there to maintain the right levels of safeguarding as well. And that is absolutely paramount in any children's organisation, that we are able to maintain the levels of safeguarding to run that safely and effectively. In terms of neighbourhood policing, cadets is absolutely 100% embedded into it. So if you look at the people who run the cadets, they are in the main either cadet coordinators who are part of the neighbourhood policing teams, or the CYP, Children and Young Persons Officers, who have morphed across from the Safer Schools role. And one of the fundamental core principles of cadets is bringing enjoyment and fulfilment to those who are attending, but also to provide a contribution to policing as well. So they are often involved with policing activities which are deemed safe for young people, whether that is test purchasing within the knife crime and alcohol space within retailers. They often attend low-level ceremonial events such as Trooping the Colour and other such events like that to provide a valuable contribution. So we have the connectivity. Regardless of the reductions in cadets, I'm reassured to see that the breakdown of ethnic minority and female groups still retains its strengths in that it's virtually 50% from ethnic backgrounds and the similar from the gender perspective. And we are still using it as an opportunity for people who may need low-level diversionary activity to be fed in. And I think it evolved in its strengths probably about 6 or 7 years ago with that focus, and that is still maintained, albeit at a lower level.
I think you're proving the point of why it was a terrible decision to cut funding, a relatively low amount of funding to the cadets, and saying how wide-stretched that impact was. But I think you've underlined the point as to why it was important.
I think there was 2 points to that. One was the funding, and yes, I agree, the level of funding was at lower level. The bigger issue around that change was the fact that we had quite a high number of police officers, both in full-time roles and in their normal policing day jobs, spending quite a lot of time supporting that cadets. And I think broadly, if you ask the public, if you wanted police officers to be carrying warrant cards and crime fighting or supporting youth activities, which could, and as the model evolves, moves towards a more volunteer-based approach, I would like to think that the public would prefer our police officers to be fighting crime on the streets. And that was a key part of that decision making.
I think a lot of what you're saying is a bit hypocritical of the other ways in which MOPAC funding is working. MOPAC funding is all about being responsive, proactive, not responsive to fighting crime. And in terms of MOPAC funding, what MOPAC could have funded for the cadets was a relatively small amount that would have kept that programme running in a way that would have not only led to more divergence, but also it's a career path, right? This is showing people that the police is a career for them. And as you already alluded to, the breakdown of gender and ethnic diversity, you don't really see a breakdown that strong and reflective of London as you had in the cadets, showing people that that is a career for them. So we've lost that on both accounts. And to say in one breath that we've got MOPAC here and how important all their proactive schemes that reducing crime are, and then say actually that's not important at all, it's just about fighting crime, it just seems strange. For example, we've just talked about Divert, where there's absolutely no statistics showing that that's working, which is a £3 million programme. For a fraction of that, we could have kept the police cadet programme going, which was shown, and as you've shown, the statistics showed that was reaching a lot of people from a diverse makeup of the population.
Yes, I think we're obviously at two different viewpoints in relation to the reductions of the cadets and the reasons for it. I think that one of the key points is within the cadet changes and some of the other changes, there are other organisations that are providing those support avenues, and we have to be focused on core policing first and foremost. I think if you talk to the evidence base of Divert, you could potentially go to the same space in terms of cadets. Cadets is a significant programme. It has been for many years in the Metropolitan Police. It is held in very high esteem, both locally and nationally. However, I am not aware of any evidence base which demonstrates that being part of cadets, to the same point as Divert, has a significant impact on either diversion or reoffending. I think the cadets programme is very much set up for that connectivity with police, but with limited fundings and needing to focus on our core policing priorities, there had to be reductions that took place. And it was Tough Choices is called Tough Choices for a reason. It wasn't taken lightly. Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably losing the point that I think that the cadet programme should have been funded through the MOPAC budget, not the Met budget, where the tough choices are. And I think that the MOPAC budget would have done well to fund the police. I think that's an important point just to make clear. Just coming finally, both to you, Dean and Gary, we talked earlier about the Young People's Action Group engagement with neighbourhood police teams, and we did already talk about Safer Neighbourhoods boards. And Dean, I knew you wanted to come in at that point, but I had this question to follow up on. Is that the right way in which young people should be engaged through the Safer Neighbourhood boards, or is there another avenue to explore?
I agree that is the right way, and I think is in the terms of reference for the Safer Neighbourhood boards for there to be kind of representation of children, young adults. I think what there is also is an acknowledgement of the experience that you described of maybe people coming forward and then it not meeting their needs, or maybe those people not being aware of that being an opportunity. And that is something that is being addressed. So the MOPAC's currently in the design phase of really looking at the community scrutiny model. And actually, how do we ensure that the voice of children and young adults is a part of that? So picking up on some of those key issues, recognising that right now that isn't happening consistently and effectively as we would like.
Thank you. Assembly Member Roberts.
Thank you. Just as we were talking about Safer Neighbourhood boards, one of the issues that we have, of course, is that there is a wide disparity of effectiveness amongst Safer Neighbourhood boards across the capital. So what we're finding is a patchwork quilt, a postcode lottery, call it what you will, of ways in which young people can engage with Safer Neighbourhood boards and with the local communities. How are you going to address that?
I think the issue you raised there, I kind of addressed the specific element of the voice of children and young adults, but that is a part of a wider kind of community scrutiny sort of like model, like review, and that's currently what's sitting in that design phase. So the issue kind of you have outlined is one that has been recognised and will be picked up as part of that programme of work.
And when will that next reiteration be coming forward?
I haven't got that information ready, but I can come back to the committee with that detail.
Just to move into the actual questions which I have, I mean, we're moving into the issue of the removal of Safer Schools officers now. So this is for the Superintendent. What assessment has taken place to determine the impact of the removal of Safer Schools officers on children and young people in London?
So I think that goes back to the question right at the outset around the evaluation piece. So if I take you through the phases of, so let's talk about the removal of Safer Schools officers. We still have those posts, and they're still connected to schools, just in a different way as children and young people. So we still have that connectivity into the schools. They're just not embedded there on a 5 days a week, 9 to 5 basis.
These are the dedicated ward officers for children and young people.
That's correct. Yes. So we haven't removed those posts. They are still there. They just work in a different way. So in terms of the evaluation piece, that is the piece that I was saying at the start needs to be developed, because the purpose of the change was to create safer spaces within communities for those young people, and the children and young persons role was very much focused around problem solving and understand what is driving either victimisation of young people within communities or the perpetration of crime by young people in those communities, and having that expert youth-focused lens to be able to provide a child-first problem-solving approach to what those issues are. So in terms of measuring the impact, as I talked about, was around, what are the crimes that impact young people out in those communities the most in terms of acquisitive crime and violence. The piece around the removal of the schools officers from being embedded into schools, the main focus of that was around building trust and confidence with young people. But because of the way it was set up, and it's historically been set up, we only had 371 posts and officers. There are over 1,000 secondary schools, let alone to talk about the primary schools that sit across London. So the delivery model was already unbalanced. And to the point of the MOPAC Ethics Panel report, on which a lot of this evidence was based, and more recently a recent Liberty report review of a model in Hackney, it really demonstrated that there's no clear evidence base that police officers were having a positive impact either on confidence and trust in young people in schools, or on the safety of young people in schools, where they should be the most safe that they are in their communities. But further to that having police officers dedicated in schools was actually negatively impacting a section of society which came from ethnic minority backgrounds or socially economically deprived backgrounds, to the point of one of my Assembly members over here recording crimes where they didn't need to be, and therefore being embedded into police indices where actually they would have been better done in schools. So it's a really nuanced piece around what does success look like of the schools. I think it's very clear in terms of impact on crime on young people in the community, but because the evidence base around the impact of police over those years is not clear in the first instance of having people in schools, it's quite tricky to measure the negative or positive impact of removing them from the school's landscape perspective.
The reason, I don't know if you had the opportunity to listen to the previous panel.
I didn't, no, I'm sorry.
Okay, I would strongly recommend that when you get a moment that you watch the video back, because we had an expert youth-focused lens on this from a principal of an academy in Walworth.
Yes.
You mentioned areas of great deprivation.
Yes.
The 20th most deprived area in the country. And she was quite clear of the benefit of these youth officers embedded in schools. She was quite clear about the fact that you used to have officers which had DBS checks. Now, the DWO-CYPs don't necessarily have those DBS checks.
That's incorrect, but yes.
Well, take it up with her, but this is what we've just been told. And, of course, if you've got officers going into schools that don't have DBS checks, then, of course, they have to be accompanied by members of staff, so that's an extra resource pressure upon the schools. She was saying that there was no consultation whatsoever with head teachers from across the capital. She said that she sits on many panels which had no engagement regarding this. And if we're talking about what's effective, then I would suggest that one of the primary pieces of evidence which could be taken into account is the voice of head teachers and principals across the capital. But they believe, according to Principal West, that their voices have been ignored.
Okay, so yes, I take all of that on board. I think some of that is not as accurate as it was portrayed. So in terms of, Ms West sits on the Safer Schools Partnership Board, which is chaired by a commander within the Metropolitan Police, and is a board made up of around about 20 members of people who have an interest, or organisations that have an interest in the safeguarding of young people. So it's made up of representatives from principals, deputy principals within schools, educational trusts, Ofsted, youth partnership boards as well. So Ms West, along with the rest of that group, has been intrinsically involved in developing the model. And if you took a snapshot of that group and the differing views within that group as to whether police have benefits or disbenefits or none at all, that would be quite a broad range of conversations that would be had there. To correct the fact, yes, DWO-CYP officers are absolutely required to have DBS. It's within our policies and it is centrally managed and governed. It may be that in those local examples, other police officers have gone into schools for various purposes and therefore had to. So there may be some misunderstandings there, but I just wanted to correct the fact that we have a cross-section of people interested in education who have been involved in the development of this, and it hasn't been an arbitrary police-led approach without steers from other expert areas.
I think one of the problems they had is that the posts exist, but they haven't been filled in the local area.
Yes, and to add to that, you'll be aware of the Neighbourhood Policing Guarantee from the Labour government. There is an absolute commitment to fill neighbourhoods posts before the end of December this year. As part of that commitment, clearly we're resource challenged across the organisation, but that is an absolute commitment to deliver neighbourhood policing in that way.
If I could just ask two further questions, Chair. One is that the job description or the role description is still in draft form, in spite of having it being offered in April. I'm given.
No, it's not. It's released. I can share that, and I can share the whole handbook, which will give you a really good range. It will show you the job description, but everything that sits behind that as well. I'll commit
would be
that.
helpful.
Thank
Again,
you.
we have frontline educationalists who still believe, they haven't been given the full information, so that would be very helpful.
That's been shared with that group.
And the second one is, can we get a guarantee that shift patterns of the DWO CYPs will match against school hours?
No, that is an absolute move away from that for exactly the purposes we've talked about. Otherwise, they would be safer schools officers under another name. The model has moved for the reasons I mentioned at the start. It has moved because we want to ensure that children are safe outside of school, and that schools have a responsibility to maintain the safety of young people within school. So if we have if we have CYP officers who are working schools hours, that means that they are not working, because of their shift patterns, at weekends, in the evenings, worse still, in school holiday periods, because of the nature of the shift patterns that are there. And that leaves a huge gap between what we're trying to deliver in the community against, I think, where historically some people have viewed the value of the safer schools officer role. But this hasn't been a decision that's taken lightly. It's not a resource. It's not a cost-based decision. It's based on research and evidence. And I don't know whether the Assembly members have had sight of the London Ethics Panel report, but I will share that with the group as well, because that steers us to where we have got to today.
So it's not cost-saving then?
No. It was never cost saving. So we had 371 schools officers, and now we have 371. No, the schools officers is not a tough choices decision. This was in train far before that.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Superintendent Cox, we have asked previously, we've written and asked if we can have the handbook that you referred
yes,
to.
Absolutely.
So it'd be great if you could intervene on that, and I think we'd all be very interested in that.
Of course.
Thank you. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Just a couple of quick questions, Chair. Prior to the removal of the SSOs, I believe that investigations relating to pupils in a particular school were led by that officer. Will that now be done by the young person's officer, or is there another process?
So, going back to the challenge around disparity earlier on, so 1,000 secondary schools, we had 371 posts. So the methodology that was applied was not evenly applied across London. Some schools benefited or not, in terms of if you consider it from the Liberty viewpoint as well. So the Met's crime allocation model now, under the new Met for London changes, is that all crimes come through to a central point, which is called the Crime Management Unit, and then they are allocated out to the unit which is best placed to investigate that. So, for example, if we are talking, and a really good example from where the value of the CYP officers will be now and where the schools officers were before, is in terms of self-generated sexual imagery for young people. So there is I'm sure the Assembly members are aware, it's part of cultural norm within young people to sometimes engage in that behaviour. It is often done innocently and without knowledge of the law that sits behind it. And where it is assessed by the Crime Management Unit as low risk, low level, and actually suitable for interventions either by the school or in consultation with the police and school or other partners, then yes, those type of crimes would sit probably with the CYP officers as those best placed. However, if they are assessed for a more serious nature, then you would absolutely expect them to sit within public protection and the CATE teams. So we've evolved a lot, and we are getting better crime allocation, and what it means is that we're getting the right people to investigate the right stuff. And I think probably historically, if you looked at the schools model, there may have been crimes that sat there because it was more of a siloed approach. The crime has happened in the school, let's give it to the school's officer, speaking colloquially, and that might not be in the best place. So that was a very long answer to a short question, I'm sorry.
It was a very clear answer. Jessica West, I know you know her. She earlier referred to the fact that historically she received an email, I think she said every day around about 8 o'clock, telling her of any engagement that the Met had with pupils from her school and possibly the borough. She says that they have now ceased. Is there any move to replace them?
So I think there's two aspects to that one. One is Op Encompass, which has been written into legislation earlier on this year and is specifically around domestic abuse in the home and children that are victims or witnesses to that abuse. And that is a statutory obligation on the police and is undertaken through our multi-agency safeguarding hubs via the Domestic Violence Community Safety Unit investigative teams. So that's one aspect of it. The other one, which I've interestingly had conversations locally about in Camden, is I think that secondary piece is where there has been an incident which doesn't fit into that bracket, but therefore may impact ongoing safety concerns either with children or with teachers as well. We need to get that right. And I think, again, that level of consistency that Miss West will have seen in her school would not have been consistent across London because of the number of schools officers versus the number of schools. But I'm very mindful and I'm trying to work through ensuring that where that service has been, that we maintain that and also cascading that out. But that will be in a more neighbourhoods approach. I'm really mindful that is an important piece of information for schools.
She also referred to the fact that now that there's issues in recording the crime and it being identified as a young person's involvement. There's apparently the new reporting system has a text box rather than a drop-down box and certain other issues. I don't know if you heard what she was saying earlier.
I didn't know. So I think to your colleague's points over there, if I have a look at that footage after this, I'll be able to draw some of that out and understand the detail behind it.
I that because I think it seems quite a concerning issue.
Yes, So I can't talk to it, but once I've had a look at it, and I'll reach out, because she sits on the Safer Schools Partnership Board, I'll reach out directly to her to understand what those issues are.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Cooper.
Yes, it was me that was asking Jessica West the questions earlier on. And she seemed to be saying three things, which I hope you can comment on. One, that the Safer School officers had gone because of the budget constraints. So she seemed very clear that that is what she had been told by officers in meetings. Nope. Secondly, that they'd gone because schools have been deemed to be safe and that officers are no longer needed in or around schools. And I also asked her about that. And thirdly, there seemed to be some sort of savings programme going on by, there are 16 posts across the Lambeth and, I think it was the whole of the Lambeth and Southwark BCU, but it might have just been Southwark. And of those 16 posts, 8 of them are filled. The other 8 are therefore, at this point in time, imaginary because they have nobody in them. There is no recruitment programme being carried out, even though those posts have been established since April. Oh, and of the 8 that are filled, 2 people are off sick. So there are 10 posts where there's nobody available at all to do anything, and there's only 6 people around. So I wonder if you could tell me why posts have been established and there's no recruitment going on if they've been vacant since April. That's a very good way to save money, of course, as well.
So absolutely, I would dispel the myth that this is cost saving. It never was. It is absolutely the right thing to do, and I was absolutely at the start of this work well before that, so I can say that with confidence. I've been embedded in this since I took over the SRO role back in 2021. So I've been immersed in this for quite some time.
So you've been the senior responsible officer for this area for 4 years?
2020, maybe 22. I'll check, yes. But well before the tough choices conversations came in.
Right.
Ms West has been part of that Safer Schools Partnership Board where we've absolutely reiterated many times before, and she's been part of the conversations, that this is not a cost saving. And if it was cost saving, we would have deleted the posts and we wouldn't have had 371 posts transferred from one role to another. But it is about delivering policing for the benefit of young people differently and not having people embedded in schools 5 days a week where they're not visible to the wider community or to some of the other bits that I talked about at weekends, in the evenings, when young people equally is unsafe. The conversation around schools are safe, I don't think... so what the MOPAC ethics panel, and I think I'm trying to make sure I'm referring to the right document, which I will circulate to everybody, it's online and an open document, talks about children should be in the safest space they are whilst they are in schools. If you take that as schools, public spaces, the home environment, we know there are huge challenges within some home environments and children's safety. We know the challenges around public spaces. Within schools, there is a lot of investment in terms of teaching staff, pastoral care and everything else. Now, that's not to say that it's 100% safe, and I think we all recognise that as a fact. So they are probably in the safest spaces that they could be when they're in school. And then the final point around the data, I think I will take that away and look at that locally. So as I talked earlier on, under the neighbourhood guarantee, we are, as a force, absolutely trying to fill all of our neighbourhoods posts, including those CYP posts. We are recruiting as a Metropolitan Police Service, and I'm sure the Assembly are aware, and we are prioritising people into neighbourhoods posts for exactly that reason. The data I've got suggests that, and I'm not going to argue with the data, it's very close to where we are. I think they were talking about 7 vacancies. Obviously, when we talk about issues around sickness and well-being, I don't think that's anything that we can really manage, and we see that in all areas of business, don't we? Some people get poorly or circumstances. But there isn't a freeze on putting people into those posts. It was absolutely the opposite, and I think if Mr Patel was still with me, he would reiterate that point. So I think for the benefit of the panel, that's the answer. I'm more than happy to go back to Ms West and just give her the reassurances locally.
Well, I think that would be really helpful, because she seemed to be under the understanding from having spoken to local officers that recruitment was not being undertaken and that there were these vacancies. I don't want to get it diverted into a discussion of the very high levels of absence, because there are absences for many reasons amongst police officers. I've raised that directly with Mark Rowley, so...
Thank you.
So I don't want to get diverted into that. But the other thing, the point that she was making about being in the schools, is that they can then become a space where there are planned interactions between the police officers and start to build that confidence, start to build that sense of reassurance, start to build something amongst a younger cohort, so that once they leave school, the idea of policing by consent, and that you turn to the police when you have a problem rather than running away from the police because you perceive that you are a problem to the police, is something that was able to happen with the Safer Schools officers. And she was saying she thinks it's catastrophic, that was the word she used, that is no longer available within schools, and that now, as we move forward, most of the interactions that younger people are more likely to have with the police will be unplanned interactions that could be of any nature, and won't necessarily even be with people who've been trained to work with children and young people.
So I think there's, so first of all, everybody's entitled to different viewpoints on changes, and absolutely fully accept that. And it sounds like Ms West, isn't in agreement with the changes that we've made.
I think that would be fair to say.
Yeah. What I would say, taking it right back to the start, we had a conversation about Child First. What we're trying to do as a police service is ensure that every interaction we have with a child leaves a positive contact, and we are not just there to enforce. So, for example, when we are having to stop and search a young child because they may be carrying weapons, it's not about the stop and search that we do, it's about the quality of that encounter and how we leave that encounter once it's done, and how we treat somebody all the way through the process. So, and this is a very micro example, isn't it? But if a young person is stopped and searched on good grounds and they are found with a weapon, and that requires them to be arrested for any purpose, all the way through that journey, from that point of arrest through to the custody suite, how they're managed in the custody suite, and Gary really helpfully talked earlier on about the pilot around young people in custody suites and how we manage those into the Divert programme. It's that experience that leaves the trust and confidence piece there. I think for too long, the fact that we had police in schools was assumed to build the trust and confidence. And when you look at the literary evidence that is out there across schools policing, and I'll come back to the Mopac Ethics Panel report again, who undertook a lot of that as part of that piece of work, there is no clear evidence. There is a sense from different areas around whether it has a positive or negative impact. And you can look at the Liberty report, you can look at the views of Jess and others who are on the completely different scale. But if you look at a true evidence base, there is no positive or negative evidence base which says that having police officers in schools has a positive or negative impact, which is a really difficult narrative to have because people will have different viewpoints on it. And I think that is the challenge for it.
OK, I could go further, Chair, but I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Superintendent Cox.
Thank you, Assemblymember Cooper. Assemblymember Duval.
Look, in your last answer, I understand around change and different types of approach give different outcomes. And I'm a pro-change person. I understand that when it meets. But isn't one of the issues of having someone embedded in a school gives you a different outcomes in that intelligence approach and communication approach than maybe the as and when you might come into contact with me if I need to have that contact with you as a young person. So just want to move on, and coverage, right? Are you able to tell us that across London, the percentage that we've got, these designated officers that are in post? Are you able to do that? If you're not able to do it now, then maybe in terms of that, just a percentage of giving an idea. Because, look, I accept that you're in a development phase, but I think it's an important development phase in terms of bedding in to deliver results. And, you've got to do the day job while you're in development phase, but actually I'm always thinking there's going to be a greater outcome once you've embedded this process.
I completely agree with you. I don't have the percentages, I have the breakdowns by actual numbers, but I'll send that across.
And if you could. Now, I'm great in that. Now, am I right in thinking then that if I go back to the boroughs that I represent and start asking questions of the different safer neighbourhood teams and town centre teams that are slightly larger and crossing those areas, that I should be able to see a tasking plan that will have a specific issue, if we take the child matters issue, in for that particular area, and there should be a good understanding within that team what they're all contributing to, not just from the designated officer, because one person can't do all this work. We know that. They're the lead practitioner, I think. I've yet to see the job description in that sense. Do they exist? And, to what degree you at the centre are giving direction about what they should look like? What is it in terms of making a judgment and performance of how effective these individuals are and this new approach for the future? How does that look? What does that look like?
So that would be for local leadership at the sergeant level. So the DWO CYP officers are embedded and absolutely 100% a part of the wider Safer Neighbourhoods team. So if you take the neighbourhood policing model as is, the sergeants are responsible for crime within their wards. That would encompass all crime types, including things where young people are potentially being victimised. So where there is evidence of victimisation or perpetration of crimes by young people, I would expect those sergeants to have tactical crime plans around how they're going to address those. And the CYP officers, as you rightly point out, are those experts in the field who will advise it through a child-first lens in terms of, we don't just go out and arrest a load of people and turn them upside down. We need to do it in a problem-solving approach with our partners. So absolutely, I would expect that. That's the direction that when I send out the handbook, that is clearly there. We are in a maturing stage, absolutely. I can't remember who mentioned the point. I think it was you, sir, earlier on, talked about our schools officers going to be aligned to school hours. Sorry, CYP officers aligned to school hours. We're still in a transition phase. So at the moment, they are still aligned to those hours. In December, they will move across to the ward shift pattern. That's due to a wider piece of work around shift patterns. So it will be at that point that we see the full measures of it. But yes, I would actually expect my sergeants to have ownership of those local crime plans and have their methodology for children-related issues built in.
Now, one of the issues around change inside the Metropolitan Police, and I think it was referred to by my earlier colleague, consistency. The patchwork quilt of people thinking they've got discretion to ignore or to get on with the job. Tell me about compliance. How does it work? What's your role? And where is that intrusive nature to see that it's what's happening on the ground is what has been desired from this policy change?
Okay.
Where does that work and how does that work?
Absolutely. So Mr Patel chairs the Safer Neighbourhoods Superintendents Board, which sits bi-monthly. Each of those superintendents, myself included, is accountable for neighbourhood delivery within each borough, with a whole range of performance indicators. Acquisitive crime and violence with injury, especially around young people, is one of those. Then you step down into my space. So each superintendent holds a monthly crime fighter meeting, neighbourhood crime fighting meeting. Those documents are fed back into that wider piece. Where we're getting to is, how do I know that those people are turning what we're talking about into reality? I think that's the question you're asking. So we have on our computer system Connect, there is something called a management plan. So anything that is an endemic ward problem, for example, shoplifting or theft from young people in a specific area, will have a management plan created. That does two things. One, it gives accountability for what we're doing about it, so that if somebody says, as you do, what is happening about this issue, we can articulate it. But also it draws in intelligence, brings in partners as well. So that is the governance system. Yes, we're in the evaluation phase. If you said to me now, could we go out with confidence and say that every borough is doing that to 100%, I would say probably not. But we have to drive this through people like myself locally and through the boss to make that happen. So we have the governance in place, we just need to drive it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbett.
I'm really interested to hear your thoughts. Well, you said that you've read the Liberty report. I'd just would like to know if you've accepted it in full, if you're quoting it.
Yes, we did. This was the Hackney pilot we're talking about.
Yeah, the policing the playground one. It's got the Hackney pilot in it, yeah.
So I'm talking about the most recent one, and I forget the title of it, which refers very heavily to the Hackney pilot.
Yeah, it's got the Hackney model in it. Yeah, it'd just be good to have your thoughts, because they obviously include lots of things, like if workshops are delivered, they should be delivered by professionals without police and young people.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes. Yes, we do. And we've had that conversation with our MOPAC colleagues around specialist areas of presentations where police officers probably historically have delivered in things like VORG, CSE, where we're not the experts.
And we heard that previously here from the experts. Yeah, exactly that they're really keen to be delivering those sessions. I am slightly confused about what these designated officers, ward officers, are going to be doing, though, because the model does still have basically all of the same things. So this report obviously says, prior to the 2nd of May and then post 2nd of May. And I understand that from the Hackney model, and I'm a Hackney ward councillor, so I have struggled to get information from Hackney about what the officers are doing in the schools, because there's this points-based system where people can still buy in basically all the same things, like the workshops, PHSE, assemblies, there's even one that's like, after schools patrols, like they can use those points to buy in. So is that the model that's being used in Hackney and across London?
No. So I had a conversation with Liberty. Unfortunately, so we had a really good relationship with them, but they didn't come to us prior to releasing the report. So I had a conversation with them just prior to it being released when it was embargoed, just to say, the Hackney model was broadly based Yeah, our future model was broadly based on that, with some significant tweaking. The point system being really one big one, and my biggest concern in the report, and I agree with it, and a lot of the stuff we had already implemented, both locally and Met-wide, was giving a false view by putting that result report out to schools more broadly, because they would be reading that and thinking that's what we're delivering, whereas actually the handbook, which has been released to all the schools, and go back to that is actually what we're doing. So I fully accept the report. I think it was a really good report, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it lands nationally as well. But unfortunately, they hadn't had communication with us prior, which has led to mixed messages.
The points-based isn't being used in Hackney. I think that's so confusing, because I got another communication from someone in education that it was, but it hadn't been really picked up. But maybe there's just a miscommunication. But I'm aware of time, and I just want to go on to this one question that's about Runnymede, who've also raised concerns about safer schools officers. And their basic concern is that where they have been used, it correlates with free school meals or higher numbers of black and ethnic minority students. So they want reassurance that the rollout of any new roles are not going to result in the over-policing of those communities in the same way.
Yes, completely, and we've had conversations and points raised by Runnymede in the past exactly to that point, as for Liberty as well, and that is one of the significant drivers of removing police officers from schools, is the fact that when we were embedded, we were obliged to record information which we wouldn't normally have recorded because it wouldn't reach the school threshold, and as a result of that, there was evidence which demonstrated that those groups were more impacted than others. So part of the model change is actually to reduce that impact. So, yeah, and there is an equality impact assessment which has been done as part of that change process.
Great, thank you. Yeah, there's some other points, but maybe I'll follow them up with you in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Just a question. A bystander could be forgiven for thinking that the police are in there just accusing people of committing crimes. These are things that are actually happening. The police are having to register these crimes. And some of this disproportionality has to be looked at through the lens that these communities are suffering more from crime, and that's what the police are discovering. Is that part of the conversation, as opposed to the idea that the police are just in a place and their presence seems to be trouble?
So there are a number of different narratives. I think we need to accept that, as, and different groups have different views. What is very clearly defined in the, it really does escape me the name of the document that schools refer to, keeping children safe in schools. That's one. It really does define when a school should be dealing with what on the outside world would be decided as crime, and when they should refer in. So if you think of for want of a better example, a scuffle in the playground where there's no aggravating circumstances in that, if that happened on the outside and police were called, we would have to record that as a crime and investigate it as an assault. That's perfectly within the realms of schools to deal with, and they are the right body to be dealing with those sort of things. And I think it's that sort of stuff that we're talking about. We're not obviously talking about serious crime, and that guidance document to schools from education really does steer them to, if something of particular significance happens, and it is really clearly defined, I'm broadening it out here, then they would report that to the police and we would take action. So I don't think we're sweeping anything under the carpet. I think we're just delineating and making sure we're in line with the Department of Education in terms of their guidance. And I think I can't remember where the quote came from, but allowing children to make mistakes and learn from them, as opposed to criminalising them at that much lower level.
That seems eminently sensible to me, that this is a school issue, this is a criminal issue, and will be dealt with. But the other piece that's bothering me as well is, surely the regular viewing coming across of police in a safe environment that school is of benefit to young people, to our wider communities. So why is it being talked about that these sessions should be delivered by people other than the police? Because if the police deliver the sessions, the police gain the uplift in reassurance. If it's delivered by somebody else, then the police don't gain that. And we all want the police to have a better relationship with young people because it pays out in the future.
Yeah, and I think, again, that is, you know, there are differing views around that. I think one of the key challenges around that is this is not just about delivering. If it is a really sensitive subject matter, for example, we were talking about like sexual exploitation, the police officers, unless they are from those specialist units, in which case they're not normally trained in going out to speak and deliver to schools. So historically it would have been schools officers that would have delivered those subject matters. They weren't experts in those subject matters, and there are other agencies who are much more understanding of those subject matters. And the second piece was around, we would go into those rooms, potentially not knowing the impact of those conversations on young people who may have suffered that trauma, may be suffering that trauma, or there's that hidden trauma, and the pastoral care piece that comes in behind it. And I think the concern that has been raised from multiple different agencies, and it came up recently in the MOPAC VORG board, I think, is that we're not the right people to be delivering those. However, we will still deliver presentations in schools where it is much more broad. So if we talk about young people's safety outside and acquisitive crime, or more importantly to me, delivering presentations on what is the role of the police and how are we there to help young people, that's where we build the trust. I think it was more nuanced, or it is more nuanced around really specialist areas where we're probably not the right people to have those conversations.
Okay, as long as the police are involved in a conversation where
Yes.
you should be involved and you shouldn't be involved. And this is a bit of a plea as well. I think we talk too much to young people about their rights. Where are we having conversations about their responsibilities?
Assembly Member Bailey, it was meant to be one small question. It's a good question that you've asked, but I'm really sorry. We do need to move on. So just in the last couple of minutes, before we move on to the final bits of business of the committee, can I just ask you, Superintendent Cox, we asked earlier about the Child First strategy and about the training and the number of officers who are being trained. Commander Patel actually said that it seemed as if some of that training had now halted. When we were first told about the Child First strategy at the beginning of this year, there was a big fanfare, and there was a lot of positivity around the premises that it was built on, the issues that were covered in the strategy and the policy paper, and a key element of that was the training that was going to take place and be given to, I think we were talking about the vast majority of Met officers. Can you tell us, if you know, how many of those officers have now received the training, and when that training is likely to be completed?
Yes, I'm just looking through my notes. My colleague, Chief Superintendent Ian Keating, was overseeing that and provided me with an update. If you bear with me 2 seconds.
If you can't find it, don't worry, but would you
It's here. Right, OK. So it commenced in April this year under New Met for London Phase 2. It is due to end by October 25, and the sessions are reaching 23,000 frontline police officers. So if the Assembly would like more details around, how many have been trained, are we on target, I can go back and ask the Chief Superintendent that question.
That would be great. Thank you very much. OK, so we've now come to the end of this second panel. Thank you very much, panellists, for your answers and for the issues that you've covered. If you would just bear with us just for a couple of seconds while we finish the rest of the committee business. Could we delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group lead members to agree any output arising from this minute?
Agreed.
Can I ask the committee to note its work programme?
Noted.
Can I also ask the committee to delegate authority to me in consultation with party group lead members to agree a letter to the Metropolitan Police Service on the proposed closure of front police counters?
Agreed.
The next meeting of the committee is scheduled to take place on the 17th of September 2025 at 10 a.m. in the Chamber. I have no urgent business, so that concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much, everyone.